Old School Lane Casual Chats is brought to you by Old School Lane, producing various content from blogs, videos, and podcasts discussing about movies, TV shows, video games, and everything else in between since 2011. You can check out the podcast on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, Overcast, Breaker, Pocket Cast, and YouTube. We're associated with Channel Frederator, Manic Expression, The Comic Book Cast, and The Arun Mehta Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last episode of Casual Chats for 2023. I am Patricia, and I'm here with Arun Mehta from the Arun Mehta Show.
Hello.
So, yeah, we've been talking a lot about animated movies and live action movies over the past few months whenever that we've been together, but I thought that maybe a really interesting thing to end things off is talking about video games, because the last time that we covered video games on Casual Chats was where Aaron and I discussed about NES and SNES memories, and we had a lot of fun with that one.
Yeah, and so we're going to be focusing on a book that you and I found while we were walking through the Trafford Centre, which is all the video games of the year. So this is the games that are from 1977 all the way up to 2022.
Yeah,
So
so
yeah.
this was written by Jordan Miner, and according to what it says on the back of the book, it says that he is an entertainment and technology journalist. He was a senior editor at Geek.com and is currently an editor on the apps and gaming team at PC Mag. He's written freelance articles for multiple prominent video game outlets such as Kotaku, the AV Club, Pace Magazine, 148 Apps, and The Escapist. So, yeah, he knows his stuff. He's been doing this for many, many years, and he did a really deep analytical book about looking at the most boldest, the best, and most bizarre games from every year since 1977. So, yeah,
In other words, he's a giant nerd.
he's a giant nerd. But no, seriously, a shout out to you, Jordan, for writing this book, and we can't wait for volume two whenever that you release that. But yeah, I guess it's a interesting history about how we stumble upon this book. So yeah, just like what Aaron was saying earlier, we went to the Trafford Center to do some Christmas shopping, and we were looking at I think we were in John Lewis when we were looking around
No,
for.
Selfridges.
Oh, we were looking at Selfridges. That's right. So we were looking at Selfridges, and we were looking around to see if we can find some gifts for various members of your family and mine. And we just so happened to find this book around the book section, and we picked it up. And then we decided, hey, you know what? Let's just give it a read. And it was so compelling and interesting that we decided to do a whole discussion on it for the last episode of Casual Chats for 2023, especially since we were more movie heavy for the past several installments. So, yeah, something to break things up to make it a little bit more interesting for all of our gaming listeners. So, yeah, are you interested in looking into what he believes are some of his personal favorite games from each year?
Hmm.
All right, so let's start things off with 1977. And he says that Pong was the best game of that year. And he said it was the first game of the year. Slide a paddle back and forth to bounce a ball past your opponent like digital ping pong. And yeah, he was talking about like the history of video games, where he started off as Tennis for Two back in 1958, but then it went over to the Magnavox Odyssey in 1972, where Pong debuted around there. And yeah, I think that Pong is definitely one of the most important video games ever made. I know that, for some people who are, quote unquote, hardcore gamers in our generation, they're like looking at this as like, wait, what's the big deal? It's just you have a little ball going back and forth between two lines. But it was pretty revolutionary because it was a new concept about like, hey, you can be able to play games on your television. So it was pretty revolutionary for its time, and it would become like the primordial ooze of what we would see in video games for later years to come. So I think it's a pretty important thing to start it off with.
Hmm. So, so sorry, what year are we starting off with?
1977.
1977. So, yeah. So, what was the first game of the year in 1977?
That would be Pong.
Pong. So, I mean, it's Pong. So, like, it's not much really to say about it. Like, in regards to the game itself, so it's just basically just like ping pong, if anything. So basically, you have the bats, and then you have the little ball, and the ball is automatically going from like one side to the other, and you basically have like the dials to like turn to move the paddle like up and down on the screen, and so the idea would be that. The ball will be going across the screen, and you have to bat it back to the opponent. And eventually, what will happen is, if you get it into the goal, it would then obviously that would basically count as like a point, and it would go on that. And if you check out Angry Video Game Nerd's Pong console, video, like he details in painstaking detail basically every single Pong console that was coming around. It was amazing how such a simple game could aspire, just like multiple parts of hardware
Yeah.
effectively, and also expansions on that too. So, yeah, that was, but in regards to like Pong itself, like it wasn't really like my first game to say, but I mean, mind you, its revolutionary status within the video game industry can't be ignored. I mean, like it seems pretty simple now, looking back at it in 2023, obviously, several decades later, but I mean, back then, like it was something different, and the fact of like interacting with your television was like it was just something pretty unique at the time of 1970s.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and some other highlights for 1970s that he was also able to bring up was Jerry Lawson, who was the founder of introducing cartridges into video games, and also he was and one of the great things about this book is that they were able to give off like honorable mentions to other video games that came out around that time. 1977 doesn't really have a lot of those, but they were able to bring out information like Breakout and various other arcade games. Even though this is not in the book, another thing that I was able to look up was that 1977 had a crash where there was like so many games that came out because of said Pong was able to kind of like oversaturate the market. And it was known as the forgotten video game crash of 77 because, well, there's another year that was infamous for a crash, but we'll get to that later. But yeah,
Mhm.
I would say that 1977, pretty good year to start off with, even though that technically that the Magnavox Odyssey came out in 1972, and the Angry Video Game Nerd did an entire video on that. But yeah, other than Pong, nothing really notable came out from that. But yeah, I would say that a good one to start off with. All right,
Yeah.
so 1978 is another one that I want to bring up. This will be the last one because 79 don't really know too much about this one. But yeah, Space Invaders came out in 1978 and it was known as the Alien game. So yeah, this was around the time in which when arcade games were, they were starting to get a little bit in popularity, but we're talking about like one of the quintessential classic arcade games where you have like a little rocket trying to shoot off aliens and you want to shoot off all of them right before they reach over to the ground and you lose the game. Yeah, I remember playing Space Invaders in the arcades when I was a kid. Yeah, it's definitely one that a lot of people like really gravitate towards when it comes to like retro arcade games. There was a whole Futurama episode about Fry playing off Space Invaders, and it was like kind of like an alternative way about like his way of saving the world from destruction. So yeah, that's actually a really funny what if scenario.
Yeah, and so I think with Space Invaders, I mean, obviously you saw in that Futurama episode, he fired like through like one of his own shields, basically to try and kill off some of the enemies, and that is actually a strategy you can actually do within the game. So it was I mean, it came on various levels. I mean, like obviously also there was like the bonus spaceship that would come across the screen. You have to try and hit that somehow, and I never hit it. to be
Yeah.
honest with you. But
I
yeah.
never hit it either when I was a kid because it was just so difficult. It's like it goes really, really fast, and then you're like really, really overwhelmed and you don't know what to do. And then when the alien lands, game's over, and you're like, no, I was so
That's
close.
the thing. It's not a game that you really like. I mean, there's so much going on the screen. Like, it's just that's I get that's part of the challenge, but at the same time, like if you're prone to being overwhelmed, like with so many items on the screen, Space Invaders isn't for you. Like,
Yeah.
it's a game where you basically have to have your eyes open the entire freaking time.
Yeah. Do you remember when they tried to do a remake of Space Invaders called Space Raiders, where there was just like like some cop who was just shooting down aliens and then there was like this unnecessary
So to be
shower
honest,
scene?
there's been various attempts to like recreate Space Invaders. South Park I think even tried to do one when like you had like the spray cans and you had to like spray like all like the mosquitoes out of like the
Yeah.
air or like all the bugs and stuff like that. Like if you look at most video games, I guarantee you there is if you like definitely look at like some of like the game like the party games where they have like the mini games. I guarantee you that one of the mini games in like some of these party games definitely Space Invaders. That's
Yeah.
definitely one of them. Or even like in the multi-cart games, like where you like had like not like the Action 52 or anything like that. Like there's like other those like multi-cart games where you can like oh hey, here's all these very generic games that you can all play, and one of them obviously would be like not Space Invaders, TM, but like a take on Space Invaders, and so it's been copied and reproduced many times, and by popular titles and also by people who just basically just want to like create like generic game consoles, if
Yeah,
anything.
pretty
So
much.
like yeah, it's it's like it's a tested and created gaming experience that obviously was very popular during that time and has been repeated time and time again for many decades. So like
Absolutely.
it still has its place, but today it's like it's Space Invaders. I think that's what everybody knows it as now. And I think everybody's kind of caught on to the fact that Space Invaders obviously was like the alien game, if you will. I think was the original and the best.
Yes. All right, so I'm just gonna skip 1979 because I don't really have too much to say about Speed Freak, so I'm sorry for all you Speed Freak fans. But yeah, I'm gonna skip over to 1980 because that was the year that Pac-Man came out.
No, Pac-Man, like, I mean, today, like, Pac-Man is still, a beloved character. Like, he's one of he's Namco's mascot, if anything. And even where I work, we have like an arcade machine, and that Pac-Man is like one of the big games on it. So, like,
Yeah,
it's generations to this day still love Pac-Man. They still love to play the game and eat the pellets and like chase the ghosts and get away from the ghosts when they're trying to chase you and stuff. And if you ask me, I think in more modern variations of Pac-Man, this is just me, but is it about that the ghosts have got a lot harder to kill than they were previously? Like,
yeah, they seem to be
yeah.
a little bit challenging because they seem to go around and strategically try to capture you if you're in like a certain area. I have no idea if that was programmed that way or it's just complete random, but
Oh no, no. I mean, as the levels get harder, obviously the ghosts get harder too. I mean, like I'm not complaining about that, but I've been saying even in the first, if you play like some of the more modern versions of Pac-Man, like the levels at the very beginning seem to be quite harder than like
yeah,
in the classic version.
I've noticed that too. Like I played a recent Pac-Man game over at a bowling alley that I went to with my family, and they have like this like huge Pac-Man arcade game where you have like multiple people playing, and the levels are huge. And even with the first level, when you're trying to like gather up all the pellets as fast as you can, the ghosts are relentless. I have no idea why they decided to make it so hard. It's like you have all these little kids who are in the bowling alley and they're playing the games and they're going into the bowling alley and they're going over to the laser room to, shoot everybody. And then you want to have them playing Pac-Man and then all of a sudden it's like, you get crushed in the first level.
So, I mean, yeah, the classic Pac-Man, I definitely have a lot of love for, and also Pac-Man continues to like exist to this day. So, I mean, it's still going to be a big game, even like there's all the way back in the 1980s. It's still beloved to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember a long time ago when I saw a digital gaming video where they were discussing about Pac-Man was Toru Otani's the reason why he was leaning towards the reason why the creator was leaning towards the game was because he wanted to create a game that not only leaned towards kids but also leaned towards women too. It's like, oh, there's females who play video games. I want to be able to have something that they can connect with. And so, he created this cute little character that he made after he got a slice off of a pizza. And the game was about eating, and it was about like gathering around and collecting all of these like little pellets. He was inspired by Popeye when he ate the spinach, and he essentially created the first power up ever in a video game. So yeah, I mean, all of that stuff was able to create a classic game that has transcended through the generations. It's in the Smithsonian as like one of the quintessential video games of all time. There were so many ripoffs of Pac-Man when it was released on like Atari and Intellivision and
Oof, the
ColecoVision.
probably out of all the versions, now that you mentioned the Atari version, that probably had to be the worst version of Pac-Man.
Yes.
Like, and funny enough, that wasn't the version that was supposed to be released either. But they were so, incredulous to like get it out into the shelves. Like, they just said, "Oh, let's just take the development build and let's just put that onto the market." Like, big freaking mistake.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was to the point in which like they were leaning more towards the other versions of Pac-Man that Atari just kind of like got a major black eye from just how terrible the Atari version was.
Like but mind you, Atari at that time, I think had no idea what they were doing. I think they got
Mm.
very, very successful far too quickly, and then after that they squandered it. But anyway, I digress. I think we can go
Yeah.
further into the.
Anyway, there were a lot of like Pac-Man ripoffs. I mean, I remember the nerd covering like various other ones. Like, remember Taxman? Like, you ever played Pac-Man? Well, you played Taxman without
Taxman
even
without
knowing.
realizing it, yeah.
And then there was like there was Casey Munchkin, and there was a whole bunch of other games that ripped off Pac-Man. And yeah, even Miss Pac-Man was kind of like a rip-off game that was originally called Crazy Auto, and then when they were able to put, Pac-Man and put a little bow on it, it's like, hey, here you go, there's Miss Pac-Man. And it's a bit of a complicated thing with the rights because remember, Namco Bandai did not create Miss Pac-Man, and so they don't really utilize her too much in the video games until like recently. So yeah, that's a can of worms in itself. But yeah, Pac-Man, classic game, notable, iconic. No need to go into further details than that. You guys already know what Pac-Man is.
hmm
Yeah, 1981, Donkey Kong was released.
Oh, Donkey Kong, I love this game.
I love this
And
game too, yeah.
yeah, so but the thing is that the one little thing that always with Donkey Kong is that if I always lose a life, I just know the rest of the game just it's just over at that point. Like you might as well not bother giving me lives. Like, the minute I lose one life, it's like, the whole game just comes to an end.
Yeah,
But
I do well with the first level, but when I get to like the second and third levels where it just becomes a little bit more complicated with the fire and the having to climb over to multiple levels, and then oh, you have to grab these items in order for you to get up to the top. It gets a little bit overwhelming at times. I
to
was
be
able
honest
to
with you,
beat
it
it.
gets repetitive for me. Like the minute I finally get Donkey Kong knocked off the first time, I'm kind of like, well, I completed the game. That's it.
Yeah,
You
I
know.
think that the reason why the 1994 Game Boy game was able to retroactively change up the formula because they knew of how repetitive it could be for some players. And so they actually had like the first three levels like the classics, and then afterwards they actually changed it up a little bit and it gotten more varied. And so that's why people lean towards that version of the classic arcade game as opposed to like the actual arcade game itself. Yeah, I would say that Donkey Kong has stood the test of time. It's a level in Super Smash Brothers, and there's also like multiple releases of it on Atari, ColecoVision, and television, the NES, the Game Boy, as we previously mentioned. So yeah, it's still around. I still see arcade games of Donkey Kong from time to time. But yeah, I think when you hear Donkey Kong, you don't automatically think of the arcade games, especially for our generation. You think of the country games, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But yeah, I mean, I do like the original Donkey Kong for what it is, and the fact that it was almost going to be a Popeye game, but they couldn't get the rights to it. So yeah, I think that it was able to give us an iconic character with both Mario, Donkey Kong, and Pauline, and it was able to give us a really interesting game to kind of like spend our quarters in. But yeah, I would say that yeah, it's a pretty solid game for what it is.
Yeah, I tell you what, it would be interesting. What if it was Popeye? Like,
That would have
when
been
it's
really interesting. Yeah, like
yeah,
what would have
like
happened if it was Popeye?
I mean, like within the later, like animated series, like would Mario basically be Popeye sidekick in that, or
I don't think so because then Nintendo would have had to have gotten the rights from Fleischer to do that, and Fleischer still has the rights to Popeye, so I don't think so.
yeah. It's
But yeah,
interesting though
imagine.
because because if Popeye basically ended up being Donkey Kong, like I don't know, I get the feeling that Nintendo would have probably made an offer to Fleischer, or at least asked, could we use the character and we'll pay you some royalties every time we use him.
Maybe I'm not sure. And that was an interesting what if scenario. What if Popeye would have been in the Super Mario Brothers movie instead of Donkey Kong?
Well, no, not in the Super Mario Brothers movie. I mean, just in general, like he would like been part of like the Nintendo franchise.
Yeah,
Basically,
like,
he.
Mario and Popeye, that would have been an interesting mix-up.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, what do you got over the Japanese crowd as well as Mario? I'm not entirely
I
sure.
don't know. I don't know how the Japanese feel about Popeye. That's an
That's
interesting
a great
question.
question, actually. Yeah, what do the Japanese feel about Popeye?
Yeah, I know that the Japanese love Disney, but I don't know about Fleischer. Anybody who lives in Japan or is Japanese, let us know in the comments below. What do you think of the Fleischer characters like Popeye and Betty Boop? I'm really curious to know.
Do you think there's that one guy in Japan who goes to conventions and he cosplays he's got the can of spinach and like the pipe and Popeye the Sailor, does
That
the whole
that
giggle.
that would be really interesting. I'd love to see that.
As long as that's going to happen now, isn't it? We're going to go to Japan and we go to a convention and there's this one guy dressed as Popeye the Sailor. It's like there he is. It's like oh great,
Oh my goodness. Okay.
yeah,
All
right.
right. So yeah, going over to 1982, it says Pitfall. Now, I don't really have a lot of memories towards Pitfall, unfortunately.
I recall Pitfall, but I mean, it's not like one of my go-to games. If anything, good grief. I mean, when they tried to do the whole Super Pitfall. I mean,
Oh
that was
yes, I
that was a
remember.
disaster. Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
it's a meme now, that game pretty much. And dare I say, bro, yeah, it overshadows Pitfall in some way as well.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
for the fact that you have to like walk around randomly and just jump and get items and then you save the girl and then that's it. It's just
Yeah,
like,
I
yeah.
do recall. You remember ColecoVision?
Oh yeah,
And
sure.
yeah, they had the. I don't recall some they're like their adventure games that were released like the Smurfs and trying to find some of the other ones like some of the games that girls will probably be into. I mean, I do recall them taking the Pitfall formula and effectively just reinventing it and putting different IPs in front of it and
Oh
stuff.
yeah, sure.
I do recall Pitfall. I think when it got to popularity, I think other games did start emulating it. I think that's something we're going to find in most of these Game of the Year additions to this book is that we will probably talk about, oh hey, there's this game, and then there's obviously something that's ripping it off.
Yeah,
And
David
I,
Crane was able to create some really great games around this era. Like he did the Indiana Jones games, and I think he also did A Boy and His Blob. So yeah, I think that he was able to use that formula to create these kind of quirky adventure games where you had to like jump and swing and climb down ladders and walk around and stuff. So yeah, I think a lot of studios were trying to like emulate that for sure.
mhm.
Something that a lot of studios probably couldn't have emulated around 1983 was Dragon's Lair.
Oh, now I remember very vividly we were walking through the arcade and all the games all looked alike and then there was one, as you could probably imagine, did stand out, and that was Dragon's Lair. And when we first looked at it we were actually kind of confused because we just thought, oh hey, yeah, actually I remember now, one of my friends put some money in it and he thought it was just a cartoon that you watched, so he just watched it and then just watched him just get killed. It's like, what the hell is going on? And then we realized, like, oh wait, you got it interact with it.
Yeah.
We didn't get it at first, but then when we started to get it, it was like, oh, this is what you got to do.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, it was animated by Don Bluth and his team right around the time in which he was on his own, producing and releasing his own films. This was like after he left Disney. Secret of Nim had just came out a year later and he was able to be commissioned to help animate this adventure game for Atari, and he was able to do something really different. Whereas graphics at the time were like pixelated and really blocky, he was able to essentially create a cartoon that was essentially like a um one of those trial and error games where you had to like move your character and you had to avoid obstacles and grab treasure and rescue the princess. So yeah, that's what Dragon's Lair is. It's essentially a knight named Dirk the Daring who has to rescue Princess Daphne from a dragon. That's the premise. And yeah, even though that it sounds simple, it's not. It's one of the most difficult and brutal games you will ever play. It's so incredibly hard that a lot of people felt like, is this even possible to defeat? But once you get the hang of it, then it becomes a lot easier. I think it takes you like it easily, like maybe like 15 minutes to beat if you know what you're doing. But what makes it stand out is the animation. I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous. And it was a standout compared to what all the other studios were able to accomplish at that time. And yeah, I mean, now it's like one of the more notable video games. It was even featured in the Smithsonian at one point just because of how incredibly groundbreaking and revolutionary it was.
I think
I-
I might be wrong about this. I think it's in the National Archives as well.
it
I
is,
think it
yes.
is. Oh, well, there you go. So,
Yeah, I mean, because I mean, you have to understand 1983. I mean, there was no video game that was able to accomplish something like this.
yeah, but Don Blue found a way.
Yeah, that's true. And I know that he did a sequel to Dragon's Lair, and I know he did Space Ace, which is kind of like a spiritual successor where instead of it was a fantasy, it took place in outer space, but it
Well,
didn't.
I recall Space Ace, and while it was a fun game, keep in mind, like once you've done something as revolutionary as Dragon Lair, it's always difficult to kind of like top it off by the next thing. And
I know.
if anything, like I remember Dragon's Lair 2 being more of a fever dream, if anything, like
It
all
was a
the
fever
train.
dream.
He was like pretending to like be Alice in Wonderland or something like that.
Yeah,
And
what
I
it
mean,
was is that an evil wizard kidnaps Princess Daphne to be his bride, and they have like so many kids, and they're saying like we need to get our mom back, and so we have Princess Daphne's mother-in-law chasing Dirk to chase to get his daughter back. That was literally the first level of the game where she's chasing him on horse, and then Dirk the Daring is riding on horse, and then she's throwing stuff at him, yelling out, "You better find my daughter or else." And you're just trying to avoid your awful mother-in-law. Then you go
yeah.
over to like a time machine. Yeah. A time machine where you get to be able to go over to different points in time and you get to be able to like collect treasures and try to see if you can, catch up to the wizard who kidnapped Princess Daphne. And then there's that one level where you go into Alice in Wonderland and it is weird.
It is, yeah, and it's such yeah. I can recall like flashbacks of that game, but I can't recall it in its entirety. But all I remember this time, there was just like there was this one moment when like Beethoven, like you're playing around his piano, and then he lifts up into the air and he turns into Elton John. Like it's just this, yeah, like it's crazy. Like
It's
it's
insane, yes.
I know, like I just don't think because when they put Alice, I mean when Disney's Alice in Wonderland, when did that first come out? I'm trying to
No,
remember.
it was in the 1950s. This came
1950.
out,
Oh, I
yeah,
was 1950. So okay. I
yeah.
don't know.
So
It does seem that something like I think this is during the time when like someone like the older theatrical Disney films like between the 80s and the 90s started kind of getting a bit more recognition as they came out on home video and
yeah.
stuff like that. So I think that's probably, I mean, a lot of like the well, what's his face, the media at the time was sort of kind of like reflecting that the fact that where Disney stuff was being re-released at the
Hmm.
time. So I think that's probably one of the reasons why I think it's probably ended an Alice in Wonderland, reference ended up in Dragon's Lair probably because of that. So
Maybe.
yeah.
But yeah, the original Dragon's Lair is still a very revolutionary game that should be admired, but playing it is gonna be a whole different story. So I would just take that with a grain of salt. I mean, I
I
would
mean,
say
if you
for
really want a breakdown of the gameplay, basically just wait for the flashes and then react. And if you don't react fast enough, basically Dirk the Daring dies
yeah, and
effectively.
I
And
have to say that his different death styles were actually pretty interesting. Like they were able to craft some really unique ways of how he was able to die. So
yeah.
I give kudos to that.
But you
This
know
game,
what? They missed out on an opportunity, though. And I get, it was the first attempt, and you probably didn't have a chance to probably do this. But, imagine if, like, you had to react to, like, different parts of the time, and then maybe instead of, like, him dying, it would have been like, oh, well, maybe he ends up doing something else, or maybe he ends up having to, like, say, for example, like he's at the middle part of the castle, but then he just makes one false move, and then he has to, like, he goes all the way back and he has to start all over again, rather than,
yeah,
like,
but
having to, like,
Aaron, we need
die.
to be able to get the quarters. The
Oh, yeah.
quarters.
I don't know. I just think it's. They missed on a couple of opportunities to add a couple of things in, and I get it's the first attempt, so they probably didn't know exactly what they were dealing with yet. But I thought maybe like in future releases, I thought they would have added in a few more quirks. But I mean, the formula ended up kind of being a bit kind of samey, really. And also, there was like other games out there that also kind of like did exactly the same thing too, but on a lesser lower
Yeah, like
scale.
Time Gal for the Sega CD.
Oh yeah, Time Gal was a whoa, good grief. Like
Yeah.
I mean
Dragon Slayer became
that was somebody's fan art that they basically brought to life.
I
Like
mean, it was
looking at
essentially
that.
a Japanese game that was ported into America, and yeah, it was just like weird.
Yeah,
Like,
it didn't look all that great, really. And I get the Sega CD had limitations at the time. I totally understand that, but at the same time, like when you see something as cool as Dragon's Lair, like anything that they released on Sega CD kind of like paled in comparison, really.
yeah, and especially since it came out like over a decade after Dragon's Lair, which is
Well, that's
like,
even worse when you think
yeah,
about it. Like,
exactly.
I saw this type of thing in the arcade and it was really cool. Why'd you make it so shit? I could hear that in people's heads. I really could.
Yeah. This show was so successful that it even had an animated series, if you can believe it, that was animated by Hanna-Barbera, if you remember.
Well, Dragon Slayer.
Yes, it did have an
Uh,
animated series, yeah.
you know what? I don't recall it. I really
I don't
don't.
recall it either. The only reason why I know it existed is because when Mars Girl was doing her Don Bluth retrospective, she covered it as soon as she was done with the original Dragon Slayer. Then she talked about the animated series, and it would be a situation where it would play off very similar to like the video games in which like, you have Dirk and he's going on all these different adventures. And during the commercial break, they used to have a situation where Dirk had to like make a choice between okay, you have this goblin coming in. What does Dirk do? Does he try to run away or does he try to fight it? Stay tuned and you'll find out what the answer is. And so you would see the two different scenarios. And one of the scenarios would be the correct one where let's just say he tries to run away, but then the goblin chases after him. Or let's just say he chooses the sword and maybe the goblin like captures the sword and breaks it or something like that. So yeah, they would do that in every commercial break where they give him a scenario, which I guess it's kind of cool because it's trying to emulate like the decisions that you have to make in the video games. It's like, okay, do I jump to the left or I jump to the right? Do I go into this door or do I stick it through? How do I dodge this moving boulder that's about to crush me? So yeah, I think that that's pretty neat. But yeah, it only lasted for like a few episodes. It wasn't very successful. It only lasted
Yeah, and
for
I mean, like, if you mind you, it's, I think probably the last episode basically was cutting to Steven Spielberg in the in the boardroom saying like, well, I thought we could end the show early and then we get some Animaniacs reruns. I like it.
yeah, I guess Don Bluth was I guess when Don Bluth was doing like that kind of stuff, it's like, did you know that they actually made a series based off of my games? And then Spielberg was like looking at that while they were making American Tail and Land Before Time. It's like, maybe I could do a series.
Like,
Anyway,
he
but
probably
yeah.
looked at everybody and said, "Who are you people?"
Anyway, but yeah, the last thing that I want to end it off at is that you remember that Dragon Slayer Kickstarter that Don Bluth released a few years ago?
You know, yeah, you always tell me about it.
Yes, I know. The reason why I always tell you about it is because I was one of the backers.
Yeah, exactly. And what
Yeah.
do you get? What do you get in return?
I
Uh,
got a postcard signed by Don Bluth and Gary Goldman saying thank you so much for supporting our Dragon Slayer movie project. And I also got to see like behind the scenes when I used to follow in his Kickstarter page. But yeah, that pretty much just went down the drain because now they're going live action as opposed to animation. And I did
well, I
see
mean, you can't always get what you want, but you can take what you need, as the
yeah,
old saying
and I
goes.
and here's the thing. I did see the test footage of the first 13 minutes of what they were presenting, and it wasn't that great. It was just like, okay, it felt like Swan Princess to me, in which like, okay, we have a young Dirk the Daring who has a crush on Princess Daphne, but she doesn't like him back, but she kind of does. And then Princess Daphne gets kidnapped, and then we cut into like a few years later where we get to see Dirk as he is rescuing the princess. So yeah, I wasn't too impressed with it to be quite
Yeah, do
honest.
you remember like that European cartoon Asterix and Obelix, like where the live action version, and like I remember that, and it's I was thinking that when I heard Dragon's Lair live action, I sort of kind of like the flashbacks to that. I thought, this ain't gonna be too good.
Yeah,
So
so I mean Ryan Reynolds is currently one of the executive producers of this project, and he is planning on performing as Dirk the Daring. So I'm curious about when is he going to do this because he's been pretty busy. I mean, he did
Well, he's doing
free
Deadpool 3 at the moment, so like as
yes,
of this
exactly.
podcast. So I mean, like, his time will come. Like, as long as he's not getting distracted with his soccer team. So like, well,
Well,
yeah.
we'll see. Anyway, so yeah, let's go over to 1984. And this is one that we absolutely adore, especially as one of like the crucial classic games, Tetris.
Oh, Tetris. Like, I mean, they did a whole documentary on this thing.
And they also
Like,
did a movie on this
and the
too.
movie too, like this thing's a big deal, and
Yes.
I mean, in regards to Tetris, I mean, it's so versatile now how you can basically play. I remember times I don't know if there's going to be one of the games that we're going to talk about, Unreal Tournament, and so I'd be waiting for games to start, and one of the nifty little things that somebody did was they created a mod where when you're like waiting around for games or waiting around for players to appear, well, he created a mod where it basically built Tetris into Unreal Tournament. So I'd be there waiting for games to start, I could just play Tetris on there. And sometimes I wasn't even playing the game. I just wanted to kind of just mess around for a little bit. So I got Tetris out on Unreal Tournament and started playing that. I mean, if we have to be serious though for a second, I mean, the NES. I mean, obviously everyone knows the story. Who doesn't know the story already? Tetris obviously was on the NES as well, and so it came from from someone from Russia, and
Yeah,
the
Alexei Petrodov,
Oh, it's
yes.
Metro, yeah. And I mean, I remember playing that, and I didn't think too much of it to start off with. But then when, you got rewarded for completing a row, and you got points for that. It's like, oh hey, this I'll have to basically do that. I think I could do that a couple more times. This game basically took over a good chunk of my childhood, to say the least. So yeah, Tetris has been so much fun,
Yeah,
in
I
that.
loved Tetris when I first played it on the NES as a kid, and I was just so intrigued with how I was able to perfectly align with my pieces and wanting to make sure that I was able to complete it. I remember at one point in which I made one simple mistake of like edging off one of my pieces a little bit further to the left when I wanted to, and it messed up my entire game. I couldn't recover afterwards, and I
Oh,
tried my very
that's
best.
Tetris, babe. Like the minute you make one mistake, I mean, you're gonna be regretting it basically for the rest of the
I
game.
know, I know, I know. And yeah, one of the great thing about the NES version was that if you beat a certain amount of levels in Tetris, you actually get to see the Nintendo characters dancing and playing music. There was
Cool.
Mario and Luigi dancing. There was Samus, Link, Kit, you have Pit, and Donkey Kong playing different instruments to the music. And I just thought that that was actually really, really cool.
Yeah.
And yeah, the
Well,
music of Tetris, depending if you play the NES version or the Game Boy version, are different. But yeah, they have this unique style of crafting such amazing music. I think it was done by Hip Tanaka, and he did a really great job of crafting some of the music that was featured in Tetris. And yeah, I think that the gameplay of Tetris still holds up. I mean, every single incarnation of a video game or a PC game has Tetris. In recent years, Tetris 99 was able to make a huge splash into the gaming public, in which, like, okay, you're playing off against 99 people on a game of Tetris. Whoever's the last person standing wins. And then, of course, we mentioned before, you have the Tetris documentary and then the Tetris movie, which when we first heard about this story about there's going to be a movie on Tetris, we thought, wait a minute, how are you going to make a movie about blocks? But then it turned out, no, it's actually the movie about the making of Tetris and about Alex Rogers. No, yeah, I think it was Steve Rogers, I'm sorry, where he was trying to bring Tetris over to America, but he was having trouble with the Soviet Union government and Alexei Petronov, who was not properly compensated for him making Tetris. And it's on Apple TV exclusively. We have not seen the movie, but we heard some really good things on it.
yeah. Probably my least favorite block in Tetris probably has to be the S block.
Oh
I think I have
yeah.
to say, yeah, the S block. I think is just like, oh, I don't know why that just fills me full of dread. The L block. I mean, obviously, it's like I can live with that, and obviously when you get the line block, I'm like, it's like, oh, if you got like a ton of lines that you're ready to like, you just jam that line down, and then you get like multiple points out of that. It's like, you feel like you're having a good time.
Yeah.
Like,
And they even try to make a sequel of Tetris, Tetris 2, and they were able to like make like different block shapes that look so weird, and the music wasn't as good, and it became like one of the most hated sequels of all time.
it's just like, don't overcomplicate something that this is the thing about this. Like, there's a lot of games out there now and that, take a classic setup and like which everyone knows and love, and then all of a sudden it says, well, what if we made it overly complicated? It's like, no. Like, feed off the nostalgia and then just add little like bug fixes and stuff like that. Don't like do something that like overly overhauls the game, you know? It just is.
Yeah.
It's unnecessary.
It is unnecessary. Like, you don't need to complicate something as simple as Tetris. I mean, Tetris worked just fine as it is. And yeah, I mean, because of Tetris, it was able to influence other puzzle games. You have Bejeweled, you have various other games that were able to take inspirations from it. And, now they're like some of the best mobile games you could ever imagine, where it was able to like take the concept of like matching blocks or matching jewels or matching colors or something like that, and it was able to become addicting to people who played it for hours upon hours at a time. So yeah, I guess we have to thank Pachinov for basically like influencing puzzle games that we know of today.
Hmm.
All right, so now we're gonna go over to 85. So that's the year of somebody that I know who was born, and yeah, it's the classic and iconic Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah, and it's funny that I also was born in 1985, and also Mario Brothers was born in 1985, and
Mm-hmm.
so like yeah, I've literally had Mario Brothers all my entire life, effectively.
Yes, you
So
did.
I mean, by the way, we're not talking about like I mean, are we talking about the Mario Brothers where like because we've got to be careful here because
Well,
are we talking about the one?
We're talking about Super Mario Brothers. We're not talking about the Mario Brothers arcade game.
Yeah, so like because there's different, the Mario Brothers one that's appeared in the arcade game. That's different because obviously that's the
Yeah.
one where if you ever played Super Mario Brothers 3, I think it is that where you can challenge each other to like get like certain lives and stuff, and also there's like the multiplayer game where you can obviously attack Koopas and things like that. Like if you, is that there's that version of the game, but so the version of the game that we're talking about is the one that appeared on NES,
Yes.
Super Mario Brothers, the one that usually comes with the Duck Hunt
That's right. Yes.
game as well, and the one that Pat the NES punk made a coffee table out of.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love Mario Brothers. Mind you, the one thing that always used to irk me is that when I get to level 7, that's when I always struggled. Like, there's 8 worlds to go through, and the one thing I would always do is that I would always get to like the 7th level, but I would never ever get to like the 8th level, and I always struggled with that. And
Hmm.
I mean, eventually I did finally get to it, but it's just it's. I've always found Mario in that regard, quite a challenge in that, and also like it didn't get any easier when you got to Super Mario Brothers All Stars as well, because in the All Stars version, like with revamped graphics, remastered and everything like that. Like it was still pretty much a challenge as the way it was in the original, Mario Brothers game. So,
Yes. And also it was able to revolutionize platforming games. Like every game that came out afterwards followed in the Super Mario Brothers formula. Whereas before, you had like maybe like a certain amount of like space that you can be able to run around in or jump in, or you were essentially in this box where you only had to move a certain amount of spaces. This was able to open up, and you can be able to go to multiple places. You can go up, you can go down, you can go left, you can go right, you can go up into the clouds, you can go down into the underground. You get to collect power-ups, you get to fight off against enemies by jumping on them. All of the classic things that we know about Mario is right there. We have the music, we have the level design, we have the enemies, we have Mario and Luigi themselves, we have the power-ups. Like everything started right here.
hmm and I mean, obviously we got all the classic characters, we got Mario, but mind you, the one thing I'll say is that Luigi, quote unquote, doesn't really like I think really properly exist. Luigi basically is just a reskin Mario
Yeah.
in Mario Brothers, effectively. Oh.
Yes, and yeah, I mean they were able to play a lot with the limitations of the NES. Like for example, the clouds and the bushes share the same graphics. They were able to speed up or slow down pre-existing music that they already had. Mario and Luigi are obviously palette swaps, and They were able to utilize some colors that was pretty much copied and pasted to kind of like bring in the same thing. I mean, they usually had red, white, green, blue, black, and maybe a little bit of orange, but that was pretty much it. They didn't use any other colors afterwards. They just used all of the colors that they were able to push in with the NES. That's the reason why you see Princess Peach with red hair as opposed to blonde hair that we would know her today. And that's why King Koopa, or Bowser as we know him now, is a little bit more yellow than orange. So yeah, they had a lot of limitations they had to play around with, but they were able to work around with those limitations. And I remember this years ago when I heard about this in game trailers about the NES glitch where you get to play off against like over 256 levels, or the -1 level where you get to like jump properly onto the pipe. And yeah, there were just so many like really cool tricks that you can be able to have, like the infinite one-up jump, or like the Goomba jump, where you get to like have the Goomba walk in under you, and then when you jump over the flagpole you get to keep on going. So yeah, there was just so many glitches that you can play around with Mario that made it so much fun and interesting to analyze and play.
Yeah.
and I,
So,
and I remember that there were so many rip-offs of Mario. Like, do you remember the Great Gianna sisters?
no, totally not.
Okay, well, yeah, I remember that.
Seriously, mate, Mario was my life at that point. Like, no intimidations accepted,
Okay, fair
effectively.
enough.
I mean, like, you know what? The one thing I will say about though is that later on there will be Mario Brothers 2. However, we wouldn't be aware of like that existence version of the game. It later came out on Mario All Stars or Super Mario: The Lost Levels,
Yes.
eventually. We never got a chance to actually see those until like later on.
Yeah,
So
and instead we got essentially Doki Doki Panic, but with the Super Mario Brothers 2 designs and characters and storylines. So yeah, I think there were like characters that were utilized in TV Tokyo, where they decided to like implement that as opposed to like creating their own unique tale on Mario, because they felt that Super Mario Brothers 2, like the Japanese version, was too hard for Americans. Which yeah, it is a bit difficult. Yes, it's really, really hard and kind of like soul crushing if you don't know what you're doing, especially with those poison mushrooms. But yeah, I mean, I would say that the Super Mario Brothers 2 that we did get in America was definitely a little bit better in my opinion. I do like that you get to play as different characters, and I do like the different worlds that you get to explore. I know it's a little bit weird because it doesn't feel necessarily like a Mario game. Like, there's no Bowser, you have Mouser, you have Wart, and you have Birdo, and we don't get to see them in like official Mario games. I mean, we do get to see them in spin-offs. I mean, except for Wart, we never see him again. But yeah, I mean, I think that the American Mario 2, I do enjoy that game. I don't know why I get so much hate though.
mm. I mean, like the reason I think it probably gets so much hate is because of how hard it is. I think that's probably one of the reasons why people don't really appreciate it all that much.
I understand the Japanese Mario game is very, very difficult. Yeah. I don't like it either. But yeah, as for the American Mario 2, I don't think it deserves that amount of hate. But yeah,
Well, I mean, I don't think. I think the problem with it is, I think once you get to the end of the game, you feel a bit unfulfilled. The fact that the time that the whole thing's been going on, basically, it's just been a dream in Mario's head,
oh yeah,
effectively.
yeah, yeah. Even Brental Floss even sung a song about, oh yeah, did you know that it was a dream? Yeah, was Mario 1 a dream? No. Was Mario 3 a dream? No. Mario 2 was the dream, and it just makes you feel unsatisfied. Yeah, I do agree that that was pretty dumb, but yeah.
Yeah. Do you
Anyway,
think it's
but
canon that there's actually a video game going on in Mario's head? Yeah, like like inside his head, he's Mario too.
that's weird. Yeah,
Oh my,
but
Mario gets knocked out and everyone's running away. He's like, oh well, the game inside Mario's head has crashed, so we have to go back into Mario's head to play Mario 2.
oh my goodness.
That was gonna be the remastered game, and
Yeah, Mario, you need a vacation. There's this place called Al Delfino where you can go with the princess. Do the Oh wait, never mind. You can't because you have a Mario that's trying to ruin everything. Okay, never mind.
uh,
Don't take a vacation.
could be worse. Could be Mario is missing going on in his head.
Oh, No,
Anyway, shall we
no.
move on?
Yes, please. Let's move on. Okay. Bottom line, Super Mario Brothers, iconic game, still going on to this day with new installments, and it's the reason why the original is still fondly remembered. One of the classic notable games of the NES. So yeah, let's move on. Okay, 1986. That was the year I was born, and they decided to highlight the original Dragon Quest.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, what, Dragon Quest?
Yeah, Dragon Quest.
Oh, wow. Like, yeah. So, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I've heard a lot about Dragon Quest, growing up, but I can't really say I've had like any personal, like, attachment to it,
Yeah, neither
really.
do I. And I know this is a bit of a controversy for those who have actually heard me say this, but I am not the biggest fan of JRPGs. I find them to be slow and boring and not very engaging. Even when I try to play like really good RPGs that a lot of people recommend me to play, I just can't get myself invested in it. I'm sorry. I'm just not a big fan of the gameplay. So yeah, I know that Dragon Quest was is one of the most important RPGs ever made. I mean, it was literally the first JRPG. That it was inspired by the creators who are playing Wizardry and Ultima, and they decided to simplify it for a modern crowd. And yeah, I would say that for a game that came out even before Final Fantasy, a game that came out before Earthbound, a game that came out before Chrono Trigger, and came out before various other modern RPGs that we would know of. I know of its importance, but I'm sorry, as somebody who is not a fan of JRPGs, I don't really have too much to say about it. So let's move on.
Hmm.
Okay, 1987 was a pretty great year for video games. Even though that technically those were games that were released in 1986 in Japan, but they came out in 1987 in America. So that's why that Jordan is counting this game as his choice for 1987, and that is the original Legend of Zelda.
Yeah. Legend of Zelda, I think, obviously anyone who's played Tears of the Kingdom realizes how far Legend of Zelda has come. And but anyone who's like not familiar with like the backstory of Legend of Zelda is very humble beginnings actually, because if anything, the NES needed like its adventure game, and so they started off with like just like a map on a screen, and you basically had like a little elf boy who like would go around and like just start fighting monsters, and you have to save a princess for from the evil Ganon, and then it pretty much the rest of the game kind of writes itself really. Like there's bits that were also added in, like you need to like collect items to like get over bridges, and to be able to like do things. Also, there was like the whole dungeon system as well that was also in there too. So like all like the original stuff that you find in Legend of Zelda is obviously there, and then obviously the formula would then go on to obviously bigger and brighter and even more wonderful things that would come out of Legend of Zelda. I mean, anybody who's played A Link to the Past knows what I'm talking about. The fact that you can go from light world to dark world, and the fact that everything that you knew was nice, happy, and bright, and like adventurous, then all of a sudden turns like dark and moody, and like everything like that. Same that they would take that attitude all the way to Ocarina of Time, where you had the first 3D experience, and Ocarina of Time. It's before Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild were like it was my all-time favorite Legend of Zelda game, and the fact that you in a 3D environment, you can go around exploring and stuff like it made the whole the whole Kingdom of Hyrule just so vast and so amazing to explore and everything like that. So I think Legend of Zelda has come far away from the classic game, but it all had to start somewhere, and it started with this NES cartridge.
Yeah, and to think that it all was inspired by Miyamoto's memories when he was a boy, walking around in the forest. And then when he saw a cave, he got the courage and he walked in there himself. He was able to take those childhood memories and implement it into this game. And he wanted this game to be open and vague so that people can be able to share their experience with them and draw their own maps and stuff like that. And it worked. I mean, you see online where people used to back then share each other's knowledge of how to beat the game. This was before you had Nintendo Power. This was before you had the Nintendo hotlines where you get to be able to call people and say, "How do you beat this game?" This was even before the internet. This was was before books about how to beat video games. So the fact that it was just simply word of mouth from your friends and knowing the right people of how you can be able to pass something was something that we don't get anymore, unfortunately, because of the advent of the internet, where, word of mouth and trying to like have hand-drawn maps or written information so you can be able to beat a video game is something that we kind of lost to today's time.
Mm. So yeah, I think in regards to action adventure games, Legend of Zelda I think leads the way
Yeah,
in regards to
and
all
it
the.
has some of the best video game music of all time.
Oh, doesn't it? Like, it's just stuff you can just listen to, right? And also the fact that it can sound adventurous at one point and then like, settle you down at another time. Like, I loved how, Ocarina of Time, plays up the adventure, and then when you finally get to the credits, it's like, the adventure's over now. It's time to relax. It's time to calm down. It's time to, realize, kind of like reflect on everything that's happened. Same thing happens in The Legend of Zelda too. I
Hmm.
think it's great.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we go over to 1988, and we're talking about our first sequel in our book. That is Mega Man 2.
Yeah, Mega Man 2, I think, was the game that really, put Mega Man on the map
Yeah.
in regards to that. Like Capcom really had something here with Mega Man, and yeah, it's just unfortunate, like all the box art of Mega Man never really
Yeah.
lived up to Well, I'm trying to remember what the story was. They had like an art competition, and like that was the winner, and like I think that became like the box art, didn't it?
I
Like,
think that was like for the robot masters, in which like Japanese kids would draw robot masters and they would implement them into the games for the winners. I don't know about
mm,
the box art, but I think it was the robot masters that the kids would enter in contest to see which one would be chosen. And but here's the thing: if they did it for the box art,
Yeah, like because I have to say because they unfortunately it would also be the fact that they looked at the box art was also the inspiration for the Tiger Electronic game. If you remember, like he had
oh
a gun in that,
yes,
not his arm cannon. So
exactly,
yeah,
yeah.
so like it had some minor ramifications, I think, in regards to that. But
Minor is an
regard,
understatement.
yeah, no, exactly. But but if you go through Mega Man 2, it is like what is one of the most amazing action experiences that you'll ever have. Like I love the idea, like you defeat one of the bosses, and you gain his ability, and then you can like use it yourself. Like it's I love that whole concept, and it also has like there's different things that you have to do for different challenges. I mean, like obviously they would implement that into Metroid, into like Super Metroid. Obviously they would implement that into, and I think that was really great. And but yeah, there's a lot to learn from Mega Man 2 if you never
Yeah,
played it
like
before.
the level
Yeah.
design is fantastic,
Hmm.
and the music is some of the best video game music that you would ever listen to. And the power-ups were really unique too. And you have Mega Man fighting off against Dr. Wily, and you have eight robot masters, you have the E-tanks, you have the power-ups, you have all of these things. And if you played the original Mega Man, it's a little bit rough around the edges. Not as tightly conceived compared to the sequels, but yeah, I would say that it did have like a good foundation. It just needed to be tweaked up a little bit.
Yeah, it's
There
just
were
unfortunate that was it LJN I think that was doing the X-Men games I think at the time
yes.
during the NES, and they would implement like Mega Man 2 a little bit into like the Wolverine game, but instead of like some of the power-ups that Mega Man would use, it was burgers and beer. Like I still can't get my head around that. Like in a Wolverine game, what would he use for power-ups? Burgers and beer.
I don't get it. What?
Uh,
It's like what AVGN said. It's like what is it? Did he go to a
okay.
cookout?
Oh, you go for a barbecue? Yeah. Oh my
I don't remember
God.
that in the comics.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Burgers
Oh,
and
it's just
beer. Okay.
burgers and beer.
Okay. Okay, let's move on. So, yeah, Mega Man 2, if you were to play it compared to all the other Mega Man games that came out, and I'm talking about the classic ones. I'm not talking about X. I'm not talking about Battle Network or Star Force. I'm talking about classic Mega Man. It's a little bit rough considering that it has so many glitches. There's a lot of sprite flicker, and if you played on quote unquote normal mode, which is actually American normal mode, the hard mode is actually Japanese normal mode. If you played on normal mode, it is way too easy. And if you played on Japanese mode, it's a little bit harder, which makes a lot of sense because, Mega Man is all about type precisions and jumping and platforming and utilizing your weapons to the best of its ability. And yeah, I think that what it was able to do, it did in strides. Like, even though that it's a very simple game, it has a great replayability that you can be able to, work around with. It's like, okay, do I want to go to Metal Man first and I get the metal blades? Or, okay, I want to have a little bit of challenge. I want to go over to Quick Man first, even though that he's like the fastest, robot master in the game. So yeah, 8 robot masters, and you don't have to like go through a linear level. You can go through like, as all the different possibilities if you want to.
Yeah, but
And
mind you, like Mega Man 2, unfortunately, is one of those games is like, where if you got a subscription to Nintendo Power, then you're probably gonna have an easier time than people who don't.
yeah,
So,
yeah, pretty
yeah.
much, yeah. And it was 1988, so that would have been the same year that Nintendo Power came out.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and keep this in mind, there was no internet back then, so you can't just look up, like, how you beat any of these games, at the time. Like, I mean, GameFAQs.com probably didn't exist until like good grief, like, the late 90s, I think at the
Mm-hmm.
least. So,
Right.
like, where you were, unless you had like a subscription to like, a gaming magazine that will like give you the unless you had like the strategy guides, like, you were left to fend for yourself effectively. Like,
Yeah, pretty much.
yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, this was essentially the game that was able to make Capcom decide to focus on making a lot of video games as opposed to just focusing on the arcade. So we have to thank Mega Man for that. And he would become one of the most classic and iconic characters for Capcom, alongside with the Street Fighter characters, the Resident Evil characters, Devil May Cry, all these characters that we would know of. So yeah, it's kind of funny how Mega Man is just as beloved to Americans as they are to the Japanese, maybe even slightly even more, where
Well, there's a lot of these video gaming mascots. I mean, Mario's beloved, Sonic the Hedgehog's beloved, Mega Man is beloved, and
yeah, yeah.
Gordon Freeman's. I mean, Gordon Freeman's not Japanese, is he? But I mean,
No,
like,
no.
a lot of video game characters that came from Japan, like Pac-Man, I think came from Japan too. Like,
Yes.
so like, a lot of these characters are beloved, and it's kind of funny because you remember when we went to Disney World and we were asked by like some three Japanese girls about like different like mascots if they've ever made it to to American shores, and like I think one was like called Duffy or something like that. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
I
Duffy.
remember. Yeah,
Yeah. It was like some
and
teddy
I confused it with the
bear.
artist Duffy, and like it was
No,
just
no.
it was
I looked it up, and Duffy is like a really popular teddy bear that's in Japan. And
yeah.
we didn't know anything about it because it's only released in Japan. But yeah, the other Japanese girls were telling us about Duffy, and then one Japanese girl really loved Baymax, and the other one really loved Star Wars. So yeah, I mean, even Japanese people love American stuff, and vice versa for Americans loving Japanese characters.
Yeah,
All
cool.
right, so yeah, Mega Man, I know that he hasn't been released recently. I mean, in terms of the classic games, I know that Mega Man 11 came out several years ago, and it did good. It was the highest selling Mega Man game ever, and they have been in talks of making more. But for the meanwhile, they've been re-releasing classic Mega Man games in collections. We had the Mega Man collection, which I own. We have Mega Man X collection, and just recently they released the Mega Man Battle Network collection. So yeah, pretty. And I no, I yeah, and I also think they did ZX, which is another series that they released. So yeah, pretty soon. They're probably gonna release Star Force, and maybe they'll do the Mega Man Legends. But other than that, they haven't released a new Mega Man game in quite a while. So I'm hoping to hear some news about that because a lot of people still love Mega Man.
Yeah, I mean, like, it'd be interesting to see what direction they would take Mega Man today. I mean,
Yeah, that'd
like,
be really interesting, especially since Mega Man 11 was the first Mega Man game that was able to utilize a new style of animation, and it had the distinction of being the only classic Mega Man game that was not done by Inafune, because he left Capcom and did Mighty Number 9, which the less said about that the better.
hmm
Anyway, but yeah, so I'm sure that we'll probably hear something in the near future. But in the meanwhile, if you're interested in checking out anything from Mega Man that you're not familiar with, yeah, I would just start off with the classic series. And if you want to hear my further thoughts about Mega Man, I did a podcast about Mega Man with Ash Paulson from Game Explains, or which now he's in Good. What was it? Good Vibes Gaming. That's what it's called. Yeah,
yeah.
the yeah, Good Vibes Gaming. So yeah, go check him out. All right, so 1989, SimCity.
Yeah, SimCity, I think anybody who's played either the PC version or even the Super Nintendo version, I think will tell you that SimCity is a very a very relaxing game, very challenging game as well. And the fact that also keep in mind, like so the Super Nintendo version and the PC version, both differ in very different ways. Like I think the Super Nintendo version is far more animated in that regard. Like you get like like a little mare kind of characters, like guide you through the game and things like that, and like tell you basically what stuff that's going on. I don't think you get that really in the PC version, from what I've gathered.
Okay.
But I mean, if I had to be honest with everybody, like I did have a little bit of experience with SimCity, but I wouldn't say I was very good at it. Like I always kept running out of money. I mean, like that's
Yeah.
the one thing I would always do. Like it's just a game like back in my young time, I just didn't really appreciate and really get. It wasn't until SimCity 2000 it was like, okay, then this is what I got to do basically to like create money and to get people here, create jobs. This is how you keep things watered, things like that. Like I think I had more of an appreciation for like how to look after a city and be a mayor in SimCity 2000 than I did in SimCity, if I have to be totally honest.
I am not very good at these kind of games. I'm sorry. I'm just not
I will
good
have to
at.
teach you.
Yeah, you'll have to teach me. Yeah, I've just never really been good at like building like large cities and maintaining them. I mean, even I love Roller Coaster Tycoon, and even I did a bad job with it.
That's
So
because
yeah,
you built half finished roller coasters and sent everyone flying to their death. That's why.
I don't do that. I'm not one of those people who do that actually.
Oh, sure you're not. You're totally innocent when it comes to roller coaster tycoon.
No, no. The reason why is because I just never make enough money to like maintain my rides and have enough money to like hire people to clean up things. So it just ends up becoming a mess.
Yeah.
But no, it's not.
This is why I like Transport Tycoon more than I like Roller Coaster Tycoon. Like
Yeah,
it's just
I
this
remember like on our off days in which we just relaxed at home that you would play a lot of Transport Tycoon where you would just like build a whole bunch of railroads and airports so that you can be able to transport goods.
Yeah, it's like, well, I mean, like I do it to like say, okay, how can I like make a load of money? Unfortunately, my by the time I end up getting to a point where like I'm making like hundreds of millions of pounds, I end up kind of like becoming inefficient with like my trains and everything like that. So like there's like trains like running around like basically losing money the entire time. So like
Yeah, you could tell
yeah.
that Aaron and I would not be good business tycoons if we were to do it in real life.
Well, I mean, like, I would say it was bad. I mean, like, but anyway, going back to SimCity, is that I like the whole idea of like, you have this, you're the mayor of the city, and you're trying to encourage people to get there. So, like, you got to make like, intelligent decisions about what you're gonna do. Like, why are you putting this particular thing there? Why are you building this type of road? I mean, what are you doing to like me keep people happy? Like, what are you doing to like keep pollution down? It's like a whole like little environment that you're in control of, and you've got to really like be careful of, and also you got to watch out when disasters start to happen. Now I'm going to be honest with everybody, like in later versions of SimCity, like I would always turn disasters off because I found them too distracting.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there's other people out there saying hey look so what if Bowser comes and smashes over your city like you do in the Super Nintendo game? You can just build it back up again, but it's like it's just annoying because like I don't like my stuff being destroyed.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
then SimCity 2014 just basically killed everything.
Oh yeah, like
Yeah,
I just
whoever thought about making SimCity online only is an idiot.
I mean like also yeah the DRM stuff at that time was just ridiculous. Like it's just this I don't understand it. Like look, I bought the game and I can put in a serial number if you want me to, but that's it. Let me play.
Yeah,
Stop it.
exactly. Yeah. Just wow. Way to kill off a franchise, EA.
Hmm.
Anyway, let's move on. So now we reach over to the 90s, and now we're starting things off with a really good one. We have The Secret of Monkey Island.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be honest. Like, The Secret of Monkey Island wasn't like a game like I jumped straight to, and I mean, I didn't know some other people like played the game themselves and everything, but from what I understand, like, it was very revolutionary for its time.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I wasn't a person who grew up with a lot of PC games until much later on. And most of them were edutainment. So yeah, I didn't play any of the King's Quest or any of the Colossal Cave Adventures or
Oh well, we
anything
all
like
had those
that.
education games. When my math was so poor at one point, like all my games were math games,
Yeah,
effectively, and like
I was poor with math too, and I played so much Number Munchers.
Yeah, like well, my thing was Math Blaster, like
Oh,
going
I
to
love
Boston
Math
or
Blaster. Yes.
yeah, like we're trying to defeat that trash alien, but not doing a
Yes.
very good job of it because I was useless at math.
Yeah, I did play a lot of for words. I played Midnight Rescue. For geography, I played Carmen San Diego, and for resources and history, I played a lot of Oregon Trail. So yeah, those were like my edutainment games.
Yeah, and
But
for Satanic Rituals, I played Doom.
yeah, I must have missed out on that class. Yeah, but yeah, PC games just kind of like flew me by. Like I didn't know anybody who had a computer strong enough to play like all of those games that you can be able to just like type a word and then you do something or you get something. And
Yeah, and
I
the only
heard,
reason we ended up with a computer is because my dad needed one for work.
yeah, same thing. My mom
If it
needed
wasn't
one
for that,
for
I would always have a Super Nintendo or a Mega Drive. I wouldn't have
yeah,
a computer.
same thing. My parents needed a computer for work, and I didn't get a like we didn't get a home computer until the late 90s. I just utilized computers from my elementary school, and I must have been like I don't know, like 9 or 10 years old when I first saw a computer, and
To
we
be
did it for
fair, at the
computer
time,
class.
even though, I would say I went to a school where everyone was pretty middle class where I was, but only a very few of us either had like a had a computer at home,
Yeah,
effectively. And also even if we did have computers at the time, like they're always like what were they called? Like, have you ever seen these Acorn PCs? Or
no,
no, that's what we had at the time. We didn't really have like proper like personal computers. We had these like devices that were like computers, but effectively they ran off their own. I can't remember what they actually did. If they ran
mm,
they wrote on. All I know is
yeah,
basically they just did the job of office computer effectively.
right.
So yeah.
Yeah, so Monkey Island was something that I heard of like way later on. Like I didn't like knew anybody who played the games. So yeah, I knew about the humor, I knew about the quirky puzzles, I knew about the insult combat, but I never got a chance to play it myself. I just heard it from afar from other people who had played it. So yeah, I know that the story is about a guy named Guybrush who wants to be able to become a pirate and fighting off against LeChuck. Then he meets up with the mayor Elaine, but again, I don't really know about any of the video games that came out afterwards. So yeah, I can't really say too much about it, so I'm sorry.
Hmm.
All right, now we can talk about a game that we really went in depth with in previous episodes of our podcast. 1991 was the year of Sonic the Hedgehog.
I mean, what can't you say about Sonic the Hedgehog? He was the guy with attitude,
Yes.
effectively. I mean, here's the thing about this though, and I think some people will be very surprised at this if you've not really heard the story, is that he wasn't supposed to be that type of character. Like in Japan, if anything, he was built to be a bit more cute and friendly, if anything. And it wasn't until Sega of America realized that they weren't too sure how they were going to advertise the Sonic the Hedgehog that they basically made him cool and gave him an attitude and they just did the whole thing that you would see in the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog and Sonic Satam,
Yeah, yeah.
effectively.
Yeah, he was like this.
They had to change Sonic's character quite quite a lot to the point where even Japan even adopted Sonic's persona, American persona, later on down the line. So.
Yeah, like I mean, the fact that his red shoes are based off of Michael Jackson's boots. His personality was based off of Bill Clinton, and his demeanor was able to kind of like be the edge that fought off against Mario's friendliness. It's like, yeah, Mario's for the kids. Sonic is cool. Sonic is for us. Sonic is for those teenagers who grew up with Nintendo and now want to be able to move on to more edgier games. Like Sonic was a huge deal back then, where not only was he like a mascot for like the older kids and teenagers, but his gameplay was different. It was so much faster and it was able to have a lot more varied with the level designs and the music was amazing. It gotten people a reason to buy a Sega Genesis when it came out back then.
Yeah, well, keep in mind, the Sega Genesis, there's one thing that they did differently from what Super Nintendo did is that Super Nintendo effectively relied on on cheaper material to build its chips in its main board. So
Yeah,
the
I mean,
processing,
we already know about Gunpei Yokoi's philosophy about lathering. What was it like? Making lateral games with withered technology.
yeah, and but here's the thing about this is that I dare I say, I think the Super Nintendo is far more well built and put together than and balanced balanced than the Sega Mega Drive is. If you really think about it, the Sega Mega Drive effectively is just like, a giant CPU inside like, a very weak board. If anything, and like, well, the music and everything else wasn't really that good. And I mean, regardless of whatever story that you believe, I mean, like, I think even Michael Jackson even said himself that he wasn't impressed with like, the quality of like the music that came out of the Sega Mega Drive.
Yeah,
And
and then
yeah.
there was this whole reasoning of Sega wanting to cover the reason on why Michael Jackson didn't want to do the music for Sega 3, and there was like some talks about like, oh no 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 no, the reason why we didn't allow Michael Jackson to do the music for Sega 3 was because so Sonic 3 was because of those allegations that was happening at the time. So yeah, way to kind of like smear off his reputation when you're just trying to cover up the fact that you are working with really bad material.
Yeah,
Good
because like,
job, Sega.
because Michael Jackson was under the impression it's like, oh hey, when I put my music together, like this is exactly how it will be produced when it comes out of the Sonic, you come out of the console, and obviously that was just a that was a lie. You couldn't do that.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
yeah, so the idea that the Sega Mega Drive or the Sega Genesis, if you will, was like a far superior machine to the Super Nintendo, unfortunately, is pretty wrong. Like, if you really want to go, tail of the tape with this thing, like, the Super Nintendo, okay, the CPU wasn't as great, but it had a far better graphics processor, had a far better audio processor, had a far better, RAM speed, and it just the board itself was far better balanced than this poor little chip that was like stuck in the Mega Drive and could like really like pump out basically inferior graphics like to a certain degree. But unfortunately, like, and you can even see it as well, like when they did like re-releases of like Master Systems games. Like, it's like, why were they doing that at the time?
I
Like, I
don't
get
know.
that they had their own, like, plethora of games, and I'm not, knocking that at all. But at the same time, it's like, come on. Like, it's just it's so anyway, we're getting far shot from Sonic the Hedgehog, I think. So I think with Sonic the Hedgehog, I mean, you can't ignore like, it was a cultural phenomenon at that time. Like it just it came in and basically just took over, and like everyone saw how cool Sonic was and wanted to be Sonic the Hedgehog and everything like that. And like he got two animated series out of it, and now I mean, look at it now. He's basically got three. He's gonna get like a whole movie series out of it now. Like that's how far he's traveled in
Yeah,
regards to.
absolutely. I mean, the
Yeah.
fact that we were able to come so far with where Sonic was, where he was essentially a little mascot that could, to a huge global phenomenon that has had many video games, many animated series, and even two movies that a lot of people were surprisingly receptively positive at.
Yeah, and so I think even today, everyone mentions Sonic the Hedgehog, everyone knows who he is. Like
Yeah, he's a
he's
household
he's that well
name.
established. Yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah. And I think that Sonic is still a powerhouse to this day. I mean, my friend Tom, not your friend Tom, but
yeah.
my friend Tom was a huge Sonic fan. He still is a huge Sonic fan. You know, he went over to the Summer of Sonic and all the Sonic conventions in the UK, and he's able to draw fan art of Sonic, and I think that he even was able to highlight some major Sonic discussions with me when we did the podcast together. So, yeah, I mean, if you want to know about a bigger Sonic fan than the both of us, then yeah, go check out Tom's discussions when we used to do it back then. They're pretty impeccable to say the least. But yeah, I would say that Sonic is definitely one of the quintessential classic video game characters that a lot of people fondly remember.
Mhm.
All right, so 1992. This is a really interesting one, and I want to know about your feedback on this. So, Wolfenstein 3D.
So, for those of you who do not know, Wolfenstein 3D effectively was the first shooter that ID Software did before they released Doom. And, even though, like, it is a little bit more primitive, compared to what would come later on, I mean, Wolfenstein, I think, 3D, I think, is still a pretty awesome game. Like, the one thing I will say is, though, is that, I mean, the subject matter, I guess, now is, I think, is a bit controversial, I think, in some sectors, because obviously it's, our hero is going around fighting, shooting Nazis and stuff. And like, well, I mean, for various other people, that's, a really cool concept and they'd love to kind of do that. And in some countries like Germany that are trying to like forget like its Nazi past, I think like for them it wasn't too great. I mean, they had to like censor out like all the, the swastikas and like, they had to like, make it like so it's not Hitler that you fight in the at the very end of the game. So like, there was, so yeah, like, it's, Yeah, but I mean, putting that all aside, I mean, like, the gaming mechanics are like, shooting people and, the whole, like, we're trying to defeat enemies and, also sneaking around as well in some bits of it as well. I mean, like, dare I say, I think maybe Metal Gear Solid maybe took a little bit of inspiration, I think, from Wolfenstein
I
in
would be
some ways. So,
surprised.
yeah, like, Wolfenstein in regards to, first-person shooters, I mean, it wasn't the one that started it all, but dare I say, like, it had a massive impact in all of it. So.
Yeah. And also the fact that Wolfenstein was able to release some other installments that was able to break some new ground, where it was able to, give some new techniques in first person shooting. And the recent Wolfenstein games were able to give this really interesting what if scenario about, like, what if Germany won World War II? And we got to see Blazkowicz, fighting off against the Nazis and trying to take down the German Reich. And I just thought to myself, oh, that's a really interesting idea. And I've heard a lot of people give praises for it. And the way that they were able to implement that late 90s play style, but at the same time give it a fresh coat of paint, like what they did with Doom 2016. So yeah, Wolfenstein is still in the hearts of a lot of first-person shooter fans, but I would say that you're right. When it comes to like the classic Wolfenstein games, I would say that it's not on par with Doom because it was able to take the formula and make it even better. But Wolfenstein shouldn't be ignored. It should be praised for its own right.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so next one is 1993, which this is an interesting choice considering that 1993 was a great year for video games. But out of the ones that were in consideration, Jordan chose NBA Jam.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, the NBA games were interesting at the time because how do you take basketball, like something like that, and turn it into a game? And don't get me wrong, like Atari and various other games tried to do it, but it did it very poorly. Like, if
Yeah.
anyone remembers some of the sports games that on Atari, like they were. They left more to be desired, I think is
Hmm.
safely say to that. So, but I think when NBA Jam came along the scene, I think the EA, I think, got a really good kudos for that because it's like, oh,
Midway.
I mean, was it Midway made it
Yeah,
NBA Jam
Midway
at the
made
time?
it.
Oh, okay, then like because oh wait, it was I think it was it EA that made NBA Live? I think
Yeah,
was it?
NBA Live, yeah.
Yeah,
And
okay
yeah,
then.
Midway made NBA Jam.
Yeah, so Midway got a lot of props for that. And by the way, Midway would get props for like various other games. I think that's
Remember
come
NFL
along the line.
Blitz?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and actually, I think something a bit more violent than NFL, but I think we'll get later on if it does come up. But I just think that the idea of like taking that. Also, on top of that, like it came at a very good time because Michael Jordan obviously was all the rage at that time. At that point, and so like
Yes.
I'm sure there's a lot of Bulls fans I think that were happy to get hold of the game and start playing as their favorite character pretty much. And so yeah, I think yeah, dare I say NBA Jam, Midway brought out a good basketball game and brought it out at exactly the right time.
Yeah,
So
and I think that what made this game fun, where all the previous video games kind of suffered, was that they were trying to emulate actual sports. While in NBA Jam, it was able to be a good sports game, but at the same time be a lot of fun. It was over the top. You had, slam dunks that were lit on fire. You had the announcers yell out a whole bunch of crazy lines whenever they did a good shot, like boom shakalaka. And yeah, you were able to unlock various characters that were kind of like really, really good, but you need to do some really interesting fiddling with it. And then you were able to unlock some really cool stuff. But yeah, Michael Jordan was definitely like a highlight in that game. It kind of reminds me of Bo Jackson from like Tecmo Bowl, in which like he's so broken, but you can't help but play him because he's awesome. But yeah, I think that yeah, NBA Jam is a really, really fun game. Still pretty recognizable as like one of the greatest arcade sports games to this day. And yeah, I think that if you haven't played it, yeah, I would say check it out. I mean, sure that the sports lineup of players is very dated by today's standards, but I would just enjoy the game for what it is. Enjoy for the gameplay, enjoy for the over the topness. It's great. I think that it's a really fun game for you guys to check out and play.
mhm.
Yeah, so 1994, again, really great year for games, but yeah, Jordan chose Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, Street Fighter 2, I mean, and also the various other versions that would come out of it, I think ended up being like, the fighting, game that everybody like. And by the way, like it had like all the the beloved characters, and I think dare I say Street Fighter 2 was definitely when the franchise definitely started to take off.
Yes, yes. I would say that even though that the original Street Fighter 2 from 1991 was definitely like the revolutionary point in which fighting games became a big contender in arcade games. But yeah, Turbo was the one that was able to fix a little bit of the flaws, tweak it up, give optionary characters to play as, different colors to the characters if you want to play as one person versus another person as the same character, which by the way you couldn't do that in the original Street Fighter 2 if you can believe it. Yeah, it was able to give us different levels, it was able to give us different scenarios. You get to play as M Bison, Balrog, and Sagat in this one where you couldn't do it in the other versions. So and I think also Vega was also included in there as well with the big three. So yeah, I think that with Turbo, you were able to utilize a lot of features that would be pretty much staples in the remaining Street Fighter games, and even with fighting games for the next 30 years, where they were able to increase the speed, they were able to do combos, they were able to do chain reactions, they were able to do a whole bunch of things that Turbo was able to showcase that is pretty much become the standard of what every fighting game is going to be.
Yeah, definitely a long, definitely a massive improvement compared to Fighting Street, if anyone remembers that game.
I remember. Yeah, Fighting Street, where you get to fight off against George Washington and Abe Lincoln.
Yeah. So, yeah, but I think one of the things that definitely was had going for Street Fighter 2 Turbo is that a lot of kids at the time that were coming into video games and were allowed to buy those particular kind of games, they all found it cool. So like it was part of like the culture kind of like shift at the time. Like,
Yeah,
that's what
I
everyone.
can attest to that. That my cousin Jonathan, when he had a Super Nintendo, one of the games that he owned was both Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat 2. So yeah, everybody that I knew loved those fighting games, and they would just play it after school.
The man has good taste.
Yes, he
That's what I
does.
say. Well, I mean, like, if your taste is basically like watching people get blood splattered all over the floor, but I mean, like,
No, I think it was just because, because of his younger siblings and they wanted to play too, as opposed to just like, he had a lot of like one player games like Link to the Past, Super Metroid, and Aladdin. So I think he just needed another two-player game to play along too.
cool.
I don't think he had, I think he did have Super Mario World, but I don't think he owned it until a little bit later on though.
Yeah.
All right, so yeah, going over to 95, again, great year for games, and this was like toward the last bit of the Super Nintendo. But yeah, he chose Donkey Kong Country 2 for his pick.
I love Donkey Kong Country too. When I got a game bought for my birthday, like I had the big box version, would you believe? I
Really?
feel so stupid throwing the box away. And also like I've also the strategy guide also has gone walkabout as well. I have no idea where it's gone. I think it's probably still at my parents' house somewhere, probably. But oh my God, I still have Donkey Kong Country 2, and I have to say I loved it.
Yeah.
Absolutely loved it.
Yeah, I
And
think that was one of the games that we covered in the NES and SNES memories.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, if you're listening to the music in Donkey Kong Country games, regardless of whether you play one, two, or three, is always fantastic. Rare knew exactly what to do with the Donkey Kong franchise, and it was still like it was still kind of like amazing because Donkey Kong had still always been portrayed as this bad guy, and now all of a sudden he's got his own franchise of games, and now he's the good guy, and at this time, like he's the guy you effectively have to save. Now, don't
Well,
get
I
me
mean,
wrong, like it's not the first time.
technically,
Yeah, I was gonna say that he's not the first time you have to save him. In Donkey Kong Jr., you have to do the same
yeah, I
thing
was
as
gonna say
well.
that.
But
Yeah, Donkey Kong Jr.
exactly, so yeah, but I mean, at the time, I mean, it was still like an interesting thing that you had to play as Diddy, and also you had to bring his girlfriend Dixie along for the ride as well. So like it was yeah. So for us, I think I mean, also it was kind of cool to kind of play with like lighter characters. If anything, like playing with a character where you could fly with her hair and like or hover, I guess you could say, and also playing with Diddy as well, who it's a bit more lighter, and you had to think about more of like using items and using weapons and things like that to like beat bigger enemies, and you had like a more flexible character to like move around on the screen and stuff. I mean, don't get me wrong, obviously there was still like the mine cart, or like in this case, obviously you have like the the roller coaster carts that you have to still go around. Obviously, all those were still a pain in the neck, but at the same time, I think having Diddy and Dixie as opposed to Donkey Kong and Diddy, I think ended up actually adding more variety to the game than I think having Donkey Kong in and
Yes.
that's no note to Donkey Kong. He's great in Donkey Kong Country when you play with his in, but I think Donkey Kong 2, I think was able to do more with it when obviously Donkey Kong, that ironically the title character was not all there for all of the game.
Yeah,
So
and not to mention that there were so many things to explore. There were more mini games that you had to find, more barrels that you had to look for. The music by David Wise is amazing. I mean, everybody brings up Sticker Brush Symphony for a reason. The playable animals that you get to have is also really great. Yeah, I would say that the storyline involving with Diddy and Dixie trying to save Donkey Kong from Captain K. Rool because he's a pirate in this one. Well, I think that was able to become pretty great in terms of what they were able to do with a sequel. I mean, there was so much varied gameplay that was not in the original. I mean, you get to not only be in the platforming, you also got to ride the carts, you got to ride in a roller coaster, you got to play as the different animals, you got to swim, you got to fly. So, yeah, they were able to expand a lot more than they were able to do in the original. And yeah, I think that that is great. It's definitely one of the greatest sequels of a video game ever made.
yeah, the one
I
thing
think
I'll say about it is that the fact that they put Captain K. Rool in as a pirate in as rather than as the rather than as the king, it's it kind of made a bit of a confusion because this came I mean later on obviously we'd have the animated series, the Donkey Kong Country animated series that came
oh
out for us kids,
yes.
and that came because obviously you had the pirate character as well in that, and he was like, oh well, is he like this? Is he like the boss of like Donkey Kong Country 2? Or is
I
it
don't know. I mean,
yeah.
he changes a lot. Like, in the first one he was like the king, then the second one he was like the captain, and then the third one I think he was like a professor or a scientist or something. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, like
yeah,
it's
K.
if
Rool
anything
seems
that
to
if anything the cartoon made it more confusing, if anything.
yeah, exactly. And it didn't even help that his name was Karul instead of K. Rule. So yeah, I don't know about that.
Because he's
Anyway,
cruel. Get it? Eh.
shut up. Anyway, but yeah. Oh my God, he's
I
okay.
got you.
Okay. Moving on. So yeah, Donkey Kong Country 2, fantastic game. If you haven't played it, please go do so. It's wonderful. And I know that a lot of people seem to remember the first game more fondly, and that's a great game, don't get me wrong, but they were able to bring a lot more into the sequel. So yeah, check it out. All right, so we go over to a pivotal year in 1996 in which when 3D games were starting to become more abundant. The Nintendo 64 and the PlayStation were already out. So, yeah, it's not too much of a surprise that 1996 was the year of Super Mario 64.
Yeah. So Super Mario 64, I mean, obviously taking Mario into the third dimension. And by the way, one thing I remember from that is that some like reviewers didn't actually get it, like the idea of Mario 64. Obviously, it's on a Super Nintendo console, and obviously the Super Nintendo is going to be so Nintendo 64, sorry, is going to be far limited in regards to that it's still using cartridges and stuff like that. And but there was like one review I remember listening to, and he was actually trying to compare it to like Toy Story, which is saying oh, this is like the 3D revolution. It's like no. The Super Mario 64 is different from Toy Story. I was developed in a giant computer studio, effectively, compared to Super Mario, Mario 64, which is on a console, on a cartridge in your home. Effectively, I remember those stupid reviews that were coming out with saying things like that.
Yeah.
And but I mean, putting that aside, Mario 64 was phenomenal. You were going around it was still kept the idea of oh hey, here's all these different worlds, and you jump into the pictures, and you have to beat the level. But here's the thing about this: you beat the level once, but to get one of the the stars, but then you realize you have to like get like a different ability, or you have to like do something different to like get the second one, if anything. So like it gave more replay value into it, and the bosses were against playing against Bowser, you had to be defeated multiple times in regards of all that. All of that was really interesting to do as well, and mind you, they had that little bit that they took out in earlier games, like his line was every time he threw Bowser off the platform. And by the way, that's referencing the Super Mario Brothers movie, by the way, which is what they should have done in the original movie. But I digress. Is that he would throw it off and like he would say, "So long, Bowser," and but it kind of because of the way that the audio was formatted, it kind of came out as like "So long, gay Bowser." And so like yeah, it's they changed that in later versions of the game, you should probably imagine, but that
Yeah,
was
it
kind of
kind of reminds me
hilarious.
of like a Hotel Mario, in which like when Mario was like saying, "Oh, we got to rescue the princess, eh, Luigi?" And then they thought they said "gay Luigi." It's like, no, no,
Well,
that's not what you
all
said.
the people the YouTube poofs later on are kind of like the gay Luigi, which is
Yes, I
like
know.
I remember that one YouTube poof that came out when he's a gay Luigi and this Luigi said, "Stop calling me gay, I'm straight." Oh, that was hilarious.
Oh, geez. Anyway, but yeah, I'm sorry for this controversial statement, and I think I even said it in the Mario podcast a few years ago, but I did not really gravitate to Super Mario 64 at all when I first played it. And I played it
You didn't gravitate to the Nintendo 64 period, didn't you?
I
Like
know, no, I did not because I didn't grow up with it. I had a PlayStation shortly after I was done with the Super Nintendo and the Sega
yeah, you're a
Genesis.
traitor and a scoundrel and went to us
Yes,
PlayStation like all
I
the
am
other.
a horrible person. I am the Benedict Arnold of video games. I
I'm
base
joking.
I know you're joking. But no, the reason why was because I never knew anybody who had a Nintendo 64. I was a teenager. I was in high school. I grew up and everybody I knew was gravitating towards either a PlayStation or an Xbox.
To be
They just
fair, and they were right to do it because the PlayStation at the time it was when you really think about it, it was a far superior machine. Like the fact that they went onto a CD format and Nintendo was still sticking around with cartridges. Like you could do less on a cartridge than you could do on a CD. And later Nintendo would like say, oh yeah, maybe we probably should start doing that, and did exactly that with the mini CDs on the GameCube, if you
Yeah.
remember, or the mini DVDs, I guess you could
Yeah,
say.
we'll talk about that later, but yeah, I remember when 1996 and platformers came into my mind. I was thinking about Crash Bandicoot, in which, yeah, it was able to utilize 3D platforming where you get to like jump around and you get to hit the boxes and collect the mangoes and stop off Dr. Cortex. So yeah, when I was playing Crash Bandicoot, I'm sure a lot of people were like playing Super Mario 64 and saying like, "Oh wow, this is a revolutionary game." And yes, I know Super Mario 64 came first. And it was revolutionary for its own right because of the 360 movement and the multiple levels you get to play around with and how open it was. I understand. But yeah, I played Super Mario 64 like way later. Like I already got accustomed to Sunshine, Galaxy, and Galaxy 2 before I even touched Super Mario 64. And I just felt how incredibly dated it was. So I just never really got into it. So yeah, once again, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I'm not into Super Mario 64 like everybody else is.
Mhm.
Anyway, so let's move on. So, yeah, 1997, again, stellar year for video games. But the game that he chose, and I pretty much agree, even though again, I'm not a huge fan of this genre, Final Fantasy 7.
Yeah. So I mean, Final Fantasy games. It's funny enough. Like, I know some people who were really into Final Fantasy, but I don't think really, for at least in my opinion, it really took off until like I was in high school,
Yeah, and
effectively.
there's a
So
reason why, because I learned about this from various other retrospectives from people like Norman Caruso and Derek Alexander, and at the time, and I don't watch him anymore, but Pro Jared, but he talked about that the reason why Europe didn't really gravitate towards Final Fantasy until 7 was because you didn't get a lot of Final Fantasy games at all, with the exception of Mystic Quest, which yeah, that's a terrible baby version of Final Fantasy because they thought that Americans were too stupid to get the concept of JRPGs, because when they released Final Fantasy in the US, it didn't really sell very well compared to Japan. And the same thing happened with Dragon Quest, which they had to change the name to Dragon Warrior, and again didn't sell very well compared to Japan. And so they were thinking, wow, America is too stupid to understand this, so yeah, we're gonna release Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, and you got that in the UK and in other parts of Europe. And yeah, those were pretty much the only Final Fantasy games you got until Final Fantasy VII. And then you had access to the other games. So yeah, it's no wonder why you guys never really knew about Final Fantasy until like the late 90s.
Hmm. So I mean,
Anyway,
like, yeah, so like, because it's so weird, like, where the fact that they didn't feel so very confident of releasing Final Fantasy, like, in Western audiences, and so like now, there's people walking around really confused about, like, what are all the numbers for the Final Fantasy games? Because my one says three, it says three, when in
yeah, I
actual fact
know
it's not.
it's weird. Yeah. I mean, Final Fantasy 2 is 4. Final Fantasy 3 is 6. It's stupidly confusing. And I understand why they did that was because when Final Fantasy 4 was released in Japan, they Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3 were haven't been released in America yet. And then when the Super Nintendo came out, they just thought to themselves, screw it. I mean, Final Fantasy 4 is not going to be 2. Okay, and now Final Fantasy 6 was finished and with development. It's like, you know what? Maybe Americans do like RPGs. I mean, look what Sea Code of Mana was able to do. I guess they like it. And I think Chrono Trigger's doing very well. Okay. So yeah, let's release Final Fantasy 6. I think they can be able to take the real thing. And yeah, that's why they changed it to 3 because we got Final Fantasy 4 as Final Fantasy 2. I know it's stupid confusing. And then
Mind you,
finally
look at all the games on Nintendo 64. They're all listed 64. Like, what happened to the other 63 sequels?
I re-
Yeah.
it's
Who cares
actually
about numbers at this point?
yeah, I remember that Guru Larry did a video about like the driver series, and one of the games was like 2099, and then there was like saying, oh, why? And then they changed it over to the US, was like a different name, like Driver XL or something, or I don't know, but yeah, they decided to like change it over from 2099 over to XL because apparently Americans are too stupid to get the fact that it's just the title and not the 299th game of a series. It's like, wow. Video game companies had no confidence for Americans back then. They just thought we were idiots.
Hmm.
Anyway, but yeah, Final Fantasy VII was the first real time in which they released the seventh installment as the seventh installment and didn't call it like Final Fantasy IV or whatever. They just said, you know what? People are going to get confused. Let's just stop it right here. And it was a pretty epic game. I mean, it was completely different from what we would expect to see in the Final Fantasy series. Like, they took away the fantasy element and made it more science fiction and more action packed. They were able to be a little bit more violent. They had a really interesting social commentary on corporations and on various things. They had this character who was a little bit of an enigma because he was going through amnesia and he was getting memories or flashbacks or voices from somebody that he didn't know of until a little bit later on. And you had this whole world to explore, and people loved Final Fantasy VII when it first came out. It was like one of the first big juggernauts of video games at that time, and this was the video game that had gotten people interested in JRPGs. They didn't even know it wasn't a JRPGs. They just saw the cutscenes and was like, "Wow, this game looks really cool. Wow, there's this huge building. Wow, there's these people running around with swords and guns. Is this an action game?" And then when they picked it up, it's like, "Oh, it's an RPG," and they probably didn't even know about RPGs too much. And then they were able to follow along with the story, and then they follow along with the characters, and then they loved it. And yeah, it became a juggernaut for a reason. Like, it became one of the biggest hits that Square ever released.
Mm.
Yeah,
So,
so it's kind of funny about how Final Fantasy VII just pretty much like became so huge in America that they just released so many things on Final Fantasy, like spin-offs, and they were able to release those Final Fantasy VII movies like Crisis Core. And there was also the talks for the longest time of a Final Fantasy VII remake, like when they did the PlayStation 3 tech demo and when they did the remastered of Final Fantasy VII, and people were just like say, like demanding, we want to see more Final Fantasy 7. And then we finally got it and people loved it. And now they're just waiting for the next installment of the remake. So, yeah, Final Fantasy 7 remake, from what I've heard, is like the definitive way to play it. And then part 2 is Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth. So, yeah, I'm just waiting for people's responses of that and see if Squaresoft is able to follow up with it.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, again, I like I said before, I am not a JRPG fan, so I never played it. My friend from high school did, and she loved it. And I remember the twist, the plot twist that everybody knows of, that Aerith or Eris would it's Aerith, by the way. It's not Eris. I know we got it in the American version, but it's Aerith, where she was killed off by Sephiroth. And then I remember her crying her eyes out when that scene happened. It was just us two in a room that it was dark because, she wanted to like experience the whole thing in, complete darkness because it like emphasized the mood. I mean, you have to remember we played on a really small tube TV. So that when that scene happened where she saw Sephiroth killing off Aerith, she was just shocked. Like she almost screamed. And then when Cloud brought her over to give her proper rest, and then she descended over from the water, that's when she really just bawled like a baby. I remember this so vividly that when it just became like the plot twist that everybody just spoiled because of just how shocking it was. And yeah, I think that Final Fantasy does have its place in history, and yeah, for good reason. Like it was a lot of people's first Final Fantasy game, and it's become a fan favorite for a lot of people. It has so many iconic moments, and yeah, even if you're not a gamer, you know about Final Fantasy 7. So yeah, I just don't know what more I can say about it.
Hmm.
All right. 1998. Again, this is another major video game that spun off into a massive franchise. And I'm very familiar with this franchise, and that's Metal Gear Solid.
Oh, I mean, we could do an entire podcast on Metal Gear Solid, really, but I mean, in my experience with it, like I played both the PlayStation version and also the Twin Snakes version on the GameCube, and I mean, would I call the GameCube version? I mean, obviously the graphics were obviously an improvement on that and everything, but in regards to like I don't know, I feel like the experience, I think, on the PlayStation, I think, was probably the most authentic part of it, I think, really.
Yeah.
And so I think, and also, like, there's been various, like, other versions that have also come out as well. And, but I think we'll safe to say this, a lot better than Metal Gear, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about like are you talking about the MSX Metal Gear or are you talking about the NES Metal Gear?
The NES version, like,
Oh,
good
of
grief.
course.
Yeah, do you think I have the money to import like a whole Japanese computer to like,
I mean, the MSX version has been re-released in recent years into like collections. That way you don't have to spend like a bajillion dollars on an MXX to play
I'm
off
talking
the
about, I'm
original
talking about
Metal
back in the
Gear.
day, like, when we had,
Oh,
other
oh,
options,
back in the day. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like,
back in 1998, you know.
did you guys even have the MSX in Europe?
I don't think we did, to be honest with you. Like, I
Yeah.
might be wrong in a moment, but I'm just having a look now.
Yeah, because I
Everything was
remember
standardized
that
home
this
and
was
computer
a like an
architecture. Let me have a look.
yeah, go for it.
Was there ever an MSX in the UK? As far as I'm aware, localization. Okay, guys, I mean, I can't see any information about it having
Yeah,
a
it must have
European
been like an
version.
exclusive Japanese computer because we never got it in America. So we never had the MSX. So yeah,
No, I don't think we had it either, as far as I'm
yeah,
aware.
so I mean, for a lot of people, as far as we knew, Metal Gear Solid was like the first installment, when in reality it was the third installment. But yeah,
Oh,
we
hang
never
on a
got
second.
the
Hang on a second. I feel like I need to correct this. So, in Japan, South Korea, Argentina, Brazil, the MSX was a permanent home computer system in the 1980s. It was also fairly popular in continental Europe, especially in the Netherlands and Spain. So, this was actually a classroom computer that was used. But
Oh.
mind you, at the time, here in the UK, we would have had the Acorn machines and the BBC computers. So, likelihood is it would never have caught on here.
Okay, so if it
So,
was used for educational purposes, you never would have gotten Metal Gear anyway.
yeah, as far as I'm aware, there's no mention of the UK, so
Yeah,
I
and
don't
there's
think
no
we.
mention of America either. So once again, we never got it. And yeah, the NES Metal Gear, Kojima had nothing to do with it, and it was pretty bad. Like there was the whole the fact that that Metal Gear is not in the game at all, and the all the grammatical errors like I feel asleep, and the fact that there you had to do like a whole bunch of sneaking around just so you can be able to pass one part. You had to do certain levels over and over and over again. You had to go through a tedious amount of time just to put in the password system. So yeah, it was clear that Kojima did not work on this because Kojima, he puts in a lot of work for his games, for better or for worse, depending on what it is. But yeah, I digress. But yeah, Metal Gear Solid was a great game. It was able to expand a storyline that was really intriguing, where Solid Snake is sent over to Shadow Moses in Alaska to find the DARPA chief and rescue him. And then he gets into this whole conundrum about discovering about Metal Gear, which is an actual robot that you can be able to get inside so that you can be able to just like conquer everything. And so there's a lot of interesting twists and turns. There's a lot of interesting mechanics that you could be able to play around with. The whole game is about stealth and sneaking around, so you have to be really clever with that. And it's really varied because you can be able to play it in multiple ways. Like especially in the scene where you get captured and you are put in the prison cell. Like there's more than one way that Snake can be able to fool off Johnny Sasaki into of escaping. Like one, you can hide under the bed, or two, you can put ketchup on you, or three, you can be able to hide in the behind the door, and then Johnny's looking for you, and then like capture him and then tie him up. Like it's so varied of what you can be able to do. The details of it are great. Like you can learn early on when you go over to the DARPA chief that it looks really suspicious when you see maggots on the floor, or if you stare at Meryl for like details so you can be able to find her when she is hiding amongst the force. You have to look at the back of her in order for you to find her. And and also of course the infamous just like what how the hell am I supposed to find this out, was what is Meryl's serial code number, and how are you able to defeat Psycho Mantis. Like those are the two that a lot of people seem to bring up when it's talking about like, yeah, how am I supposed to figure this out? I mean, even Eco Raptor did his own Metal Gear Awesome series just basically on those jokes alone. So anyway, but yeah, Metal Gear Solid, I really love the series. I like all of the games except for Metal Gear Survive. Like screw that game. But yeah, all the other games are really, really great. I do enjoy two, three, four. I haven't played all the way through five yet, but I did really enjoy the parts that I did get to see. But yeah, I would say as a franchise, it's really great. If you're into like stealth stories with like really complex, overly detailed plots regarding about the government and all of that kind of stuff, I would suggest you check it out. It's still great, and you can play like the collection on your Nintendo Switch and PC and various other ports, for a certain price. So yeah, if it's your thing, go check it out.
Yeah. By the way, like it's one thing I remember is that it did try and figure out if you were cheating or not. It didn't let you use like turbo controllers and stuff.
Oh yeah, that's
So
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then there was also the part in which when the colonel was talking about like you're using a mono television, how dare you? And then Mei Ling was talking about like, well, not everybody's able to have mono televisions. We still like you for what you are, Snake, even though if you have an inferior television set. So yeah, I just love the fourth wall breaking humor on this one.
Yeah, and also like I remember when Psycho Mantis would go through like your game cartridge and like figure out what you like to play. So like
You like to play Castlevania, don't you?
yeah,
Yeah,
like
it depends on whether you have the PlayStation or GameCube port. It's able to like say, "Oh, you like Super Mario Sunshine, don't you? Oh, you like to play Symphony of the Night, don't you? You like to play Konami games, don't you?"
hmm,
Yeah, that was a great little reference. And I love the fact that they were able to bring back it slightly in Metal Gear Solid 4 when you get to see the spirit of Psycho Mantis and he's trying to read off your memory card, but you don't have a memory card because it's on the PS3. And then he's like, "Oh, I can move your controller," but but he can't because it's wireless.
yeah.
Yeah, that was a great moment. Anyway, but yeah, Metal Gear Solid. Yeah, I would say that good choice for 1998. It was definitely one of the stellar games that a lot of people still remember to this day.
Hmm.
All right. Now, I'm not going to really say too much sadly about 99 because he chose System Shock 2 and I have not played that game sadly.
Yeah, like I mean, System Shock 2. I mean, you have to forgive me. Like it is, I know it's a survival game,
It's
and
a first it's like a yeah, it's kind of like a survival game that takes place in a spaceship and you have to fight off against like this evil computer. But yeah, I'm sorry, I don't really know too much about it.
yeah, I have to say, like I'm just looking at it now. Like wow, it's only like a buy System Shock 2 Shock Pack. It's only like it's like right here, it's like $10. So
Okay.
like, I might check it out.
Okay,
So
cool.
sorry everybody, I have to play it.
Yeah, I have to play it too. So sorry, everyone. But I did hear that the closest equivalent to a spiritual successor to System Shock 2 is BioShock, which I have played and I absolutely love. So yeah, if I loved BioShock, maybe I'll like System Shock 2. So I'll have to check it out at some point.
Yeah.
All right, now this is something that you will definitely delve more into than I will, and that is Half-Life Counter-Strike.
Oh, well, Counter-Strike, I think just, multiplayer, online multiplayer games just took off at that point. And the one thing I think that was done really well was Counter-Strike. Now, the game, I mean, is pretty simple. That you start off with a team, you load up with your weapons, you then go and there's different types of ways. Basically, you can just do like, just shooting one another, or you can like, you can rescue hostages, or you can like, defuse a bomb. I mean, like, there's plenty of like gameplay mechanics that are also in it. But in regards to that, I think that's not what made Counter-Strike, I think, so, I think made it so popular. I think one of the things that they did is that at the time, Steam, or Valve, made their development tools, for creating create multiplayer servers available publicly. So effectively, a lot of companies, and I think a lot of universities, and I think a lot of people that had data centers or like, data houses at the time, used this as an opportunity to, either, advertise their wares or to basically just make themselves make popular communities and stuff like that. So you saw universities, you saw like companies, you saw like other places that were basically like creating spaces for Counter-Strike games to be played. So you could basically download the dedicated server, you'd run it like on a server or like on a computer or whatever, and that could be a place where you could play your games or where your friends could play your games as well if you run it on your PC and just left it on. Effectively. So, it was one of the very first, I mean, I wouldn't say open source, but I mean, like, it's one of the very first, SDKs that gave the ability, like saying, look, you're not relying on the game provider to provide you the online space in order to play your game. You can play it anywhere, effectively. It's not battle.net. Like, you can play this, anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Effectively, and so it was very successful in that regard, and it was just something that really took off. And so it isn't just the gameplay; it's just the ability to actually like play the game and be able to play with other people and stuff. And also those modifications for it too, where you can play with bots.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Cool. All right, so 2001, this was the year that Microsoft Xbox was released, and their starting game that a lot of people have played was Halo Combat Evolved.
So in regards to Halo, you can fall into two camps. You could be very cynical and say that Halo really didn't really do much in regards to like, expanding like on the genre of like first person shooters. Like, it wasn't like inventing like a new sort of game. You knew exactly what the game was going to be the minute you saw and looked at it. And to keep this in mind, like, in the original idea of what Halo was supposed to be, originally, like, it was developed by Bungie, who made the Myth series. And so, Myth sort of like was more like, you take a bunch of like characters and like, you go and have them fight like monsters and stuff like that. And it was
Yeah,
more
it
like
was a
a
strategy game.
strategy game, yeah, and so it was more based on that, and so Halo was going to be the first ever like third person shooter, I guess you would say. So like Master Chief would be a character that would be like running around in like in an area, and then obviously he'd be picking up weapons and then fighting the people on there in like a third person shooting game rather than like fantasy strategy game. But then obviously that then changed when Microsoft got involved and they were looking for a game for the Xbox, and then obviously that became Halo Combat Evolved, which then turned into a first-person shooter. And so in regards to like what it did in regards to that, I mean, like it introduced the idea of not like running out of health, but effectively like you would basically get sh if you basically have a shield where if you got shot enough times, your shield would basically break, and then you have to basically duck for cover, and until your shield recharged, then you can go out and start fighting again. And but it would give you like a little bit of health, but not very much. You couldn't depend on your health in order to keep you alive. So I guess in that regard, it made it kind of improved on that kind of thing. So, but again, like the things was just the same. The weapons were all different. Unreal Tournament had like a variation of weapons in regards to that. Like various other shooting games also had like those types like variation of like what projectiles guns produced. But that's the cynical side of that. But if you're really like a big massive fan of Halo, which I was at the time, like I loved Halo at the point, and my friend, shout out to Tom, by the way, he allowed me to like, complete the game and, be able to go through it, because I didn't have an Xbox at the time. I still had a GameCube at the time. But if it wasn't for that, playing for Halo and, then also there was, playing, with other people for like System Link, like local LAN at the time. So it was like, that's kind of pushed me towards like getting an Xbox because, we'd all bring I loved it. Like we all bring our Xboxes like to each other's houses, and we would be playing Halo at the time, like on different TVs, and like it was so much fun. And it's it was funny because like if I reckon if Xbox had like opted like portability somehow into their system, kind of like what the Nintendo Switch did at the time, and I get that probably would have been not been a possibility. I reckon Xbox probably would have cornered the market there. But
Yeah.
I think Halo was so much fun, and you do relate to Master Chief quite a bit because he's not like a guy who comes out with like loads of catchphrases and anything like that. He's very calm and very quiet, and he doesn't really get to like boisterous until eventually like through later games. So like I mean, you could just feel like you are Master Chief in that game, and just going through the motions and everything. So like I mean. Would I like prefer to be like Link as a silent protagonist? Probably not. Like, he needs obviously to like, re interact with like one another and stuff. And also the story is quite interesting as well. Like, it doesn't start you actually at the very beginning of the Halo story. If anything, it starts you like halfway through. So like, Reach has obviously been destroyed, and the Pillar of Autumn is trying to escape, but they're still being trapped by the Covenant. And then they come across the first Halo ring, effectively, which is with the place where you find all the story of Halo, like the flood, like the fact that it's been fired once before. It could end all life in the universe as you know it. The end of like trillions of lives and stuff like that. And it's just like that whole thing hanging over your head whilst you're trying to fight for your own survival. Like the story, the gameplay, the music as well. The music is done very well. I think Martin's done a very good job in regards to all of that. And so. Yeah, I think if you've not experienced Halo before, I would suggest you at least give it one shot. And it is available like on Steam, and also available on the Microsoft Store as well. So yeah, I would definitely say check it out.
Absolutely. And I remember when Halo became really big, and one of the major reasons why Xbox really focused on its online multiplayer games. And it was like, wow, I no longer have to worry about like, four people right next to me. I could actually like play this online with my friends, and we get to be able to play these games from our homes. And it was at that point in which when arcade games were just kind of like dwindling down to the point of extinction, and everybody was just playing their games from home, and it was like a major revolutionary thing where you had like Xbox Live, and it was able to like utilize the opportunity for people to really get a taste of what would become gaming for the next 20 years, and that just like emphasized even more at that point in time of how dated Nintendo's ideologies were. But yeah, I think that the Xbox's idea of changing Halo from a real-time strategy to a first-person shooter, I'm sure that may have disappointed some real-time strategy fans. But as for like first-person shooter fans who felt like, oh, it's not really that interesting because I've seen this already with like Doom or GoldenEye or Half-Life. But the things that it was able to do differently, it became iconic for a reason. So, yeah, I would say that Halo is one of the quintessential first-person shooter games.
Hmm.
All right, so yeah, now we go over to 2002, and again, this is a really interesting pick. It's Grand Theft Auto Vice City.
I mean, I gotta be honest with everybody. I kind of fell off Grand Theft Auto after 3. So like I didn't really. One thing I will recognize though is that Grand Theft Auto series after that, like was really captured the imaginations of a lot of people, and Rockstar Games has really done a very good job with these games in
Yeah.
that regard. But I mean, to be honest with you, I've never really got involved in like all the stories, like the gameplay and stuff like that. All I know is like you can get into cars and like drive around and stuff, and those there's missions and everything like that. Totally get all those things, and but in regards to like everything else, like I can't really say I'm like overly familiar with the show with the Grand Theft Auto. Sorry.
Yes. Anyway, but yeah, from what I remember from Vice City is that it's the game that was definitely influenced by Scarface because it takes place in the 1980s in Vice City, which is essentially their version of Miami, Florida. And you essentially are a person who is part of this huge mafia group, and you're just going around in Vice City doing missions involving with like taking people down or stealing something or breaking into something. And yeah, it basically just went into the formula of what Grand Theft Auto 3 was able to do, whereas the first two Grand Theft Auto games were definitely like your overhead games where you get to be able to play around as somebody who just drove around and you get to be able to do a whole bunch of things. But 3 was able to expand it as a sandbox game where you get to be able to do a whole bunch of missions. Well, if you don't want to do the missions, you don't have to. You could just go around, steal cars, kill people, make money, do whatever. And it blew everybody away. I'm surprised that 3 didn't make it onto the list because of how influential it was. But yeah, out of all the spin-off games that they released, which was like Vice City and San Andreas, yeah, I guess they chose Vice City because it came out before San Andreas and it was able to bring a lot more than Grand Theft Auto 3 was able to bring, a bigger world, more things to do, more places to explore, more characters to meet up with. The music they were able to emphasize a lot more because it makes you feel like it was from the 80s. And yeah, a lot more Easter eggs that they were able to implement there. I think this might have been the game that emphasized more on the Easter eggs. And yeah, a lot of there was a lot of places that were cut that from the final product. And then, if you were able to play around with a few glitches where you get to like fly around in a plane and you get to be able to like explore all the areas that were cut, and it was like an abandoned city or something that was supposed to further the story. But yeah, I think that Vice City was able to expand what 3 was able to get started on. And then, of course, we had San Andreas, which was able to expand it even more, which took place in like the early to mid 90s in San Andreas, which is their version of like California. I think it was like San Francisco, I think that was, because Los Santos is Los Angeles for the Grand Theft Auto series. But yeah, I mean, we didn't get to use Vice City until just recently when we saw the trailer for Grand Theft Auto 6. So yeah, this will be the first time in over 20 years that we get to see Vice City again. And boy, does it look different than it did back in, both Vice City. Not only because of, well, it took place in the 80s in that game, but also the graphics where they look so much better. So yeah, even though I'm not a Grand Theft Auto fan, my other cousins are more into it than I am. But I have seen them play through it. I even played through a few missions myself, and I am genuinely excited for what 6 has to offer. And yeah, if you essentially want to have like a sort of prequel to what you'll expect from 6, play Vice City. All right, so 2003, the game that was hated on because of its graphics and now has become one of the most beloved games of the franchise. We're going to another Zelda game this time, which is Wind Waker.
Yeah. So, I mean, Wind Waker, I think, was, had a bit of a troubled, for land to kind of like, put itself on because, well, first of all, it was on the GameCube, which at the time, was, a very cultish console, I guess you could say at the time. And then also, I think people were waiting for like a definitive Zelda game, and unfortunately, it ended up being Wind Waker at the time, and so I mean, it didn't really like get towards the I guess the more adult Nintendo fans. I guess at the time we'd have to wait until Twilight Princess before obviously we would get to that point. But I mean, for those who tried Wind Waker and actually played the game, they actually did love it. So and it did. provide. I mean, obviously, going across the oceans was a bit frustrating, but at the same time, like, all the other bits of the game were, were quite rewarding, to go through. I personally didn't go play Wind Waker myself. I did kind of like avoid it, thinking that, there was other places that I could go. And at the time, like, unfortunately, like, Halo 2 was like, on the premise, and also I was getting quite a few Xbox games at the time after we talked about our previous game, Halo. And so I kind of gravitated towards that. And also, any GameCube games that I did get at the time, like Star Fox Adventures was one of them, and Star Fox Assault I think was another, and I also got various other ones that were there. Super Mario Super Sunshine I was playing also at the time as well, and so yeah, I didn't really gravitate towards Zelda all that much during the GameCube years, to be honest with you. I think I think the Four Swords I think was probably like the GameCube game I think I got for Legend of Zelda I think at the time. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember the hate that this got. I remember the vitriol discussions about like, why can't it be like the ones that we saw in the tech demo at Space World 2000 with the realistic Link and Ganon? I wanted that game. Why you gave us this baby game? Boy, how wrong they were when they finally got to find the product of Wind Waker as like a really good Zelda game.
Yeah,
Sure, it has its
I think it's
problems.
because cell shading at the time, everyone thought it was going to be like the future. Because if you remember, like Beautiful Joe was getting quite a few attentions
That's
at the
right,
time. If you remember
yeah.
that game, yeah. So I think and also a lot of the other games were also going to go cell shading as well because everyone kind of liked the look of it at the time. So that's the reason I think that they went with it because a few other people also liked the like of it as well. So.
Yeah, and because of its cell shading designs, it actually aged better than a lot of the modern games that we would get even when they games that came out afterwards. Like, yeah, if you were to look at games that came out roughly around the same time as Wind Waker, it looks pretty dated by today's standards. Whereas something like Zelda, Wind Waker, because if they were able to play off with a colorful art style, it's able to age a lot better, which, it was a major advantage point. And from what I understand, more people started gravitating towards the Legend of Zelda series because of its art style. So, yeah, it brought in a new audience to Zelda, especially women. So yeah, I guess there was some not to mention there was also the music, there was also the characters, there was also the different gameplay that you can be able to do, the mini games. So, yeah, a lot of things were brought into Wind Waker that was able to become much different than you would expect to see in a Zelda game because the previous game was Majora's Mask, which was a really, really dark game. And so we have Wind Waker come in and be a little bit more lighter and a fun adventure. I guess a lot of people were just kind of like turned off for it, but then eventually they started warming up to it. And yeah, it's become one of the more classic Zelda games for a reason. All right, so 2004. Now, this is a really, really great choice. And again, a pretty good year for gaming, but I cannot deny that World of Warcraft blew everybody away.
Yeah, I mean, like when Ozzy Osbourne obviously was doing advertisements at the time, you knew it was basically a main thing at the time, and yeah, I mean, like I got to be honest with everybody, like I tried to get a little bit into World of Warcraft, but everybody else was like getting into like other, so the World of Warcraft wasn't the only game in town at the time in regards to like where these this new type of RPG kind of like genre, like it was various other ones, like Fantasy Star Online obviously was one of them, and then there was another one I think everybody was into, and because I think at the time, I think you had to play subscription. I think to get
Yes, you
into
did have to get it. You
to
had to get yes, you did have to get like a
yeah.
yearly subscription for it.
And
Yeah.
then there was like other games that was you let you in, load you in for free if you just play the game. So like a lot of people were doing that. So yeah, I got to be honest with everybody. I think at least in my opinion, like I was sort of like a little bit getting turned off. I think when I also got to Warcraft 3, I love Warcraft 2: Tides of Darkness. That's my all-time Warcraft game. But in regards to World of Warcraft, I gave it a miss. To be honest with
Yeah,
you.
and yeah, like I said before, I'm not a huge fan of RPGs and MMORPGs I could never really get into. I know that there's like the whole concept of like you get to create your own characters and you get to be able to explore this massive world and fight off against bad guys and level up. I'm sorry, I just never really got into that. It just feels like busy work to me. So, I knew people who were into this game. 2004, I was starting my first year in college and I knew so many people who were into this game. Like they were addicted to it. It's not even funny. And I remember the South Park episode when they referenced World of Warcraft. That's when I knew, wow, This thing is huge. Like this game was able to sell like millions overnight. No other game was able to do that at that point, in which like it got global news about how huge it was. And it became a household name even for people who have never played World of Warcraft. So yeah, it was a huge juggernaut of a game. And yeah, I'm just really sad that nowadays it's just become a shadow of its former self because of just how awful Activision Blizzard is. But yeah, I've already discussed about that in depth in Aaron and Patricia when we were looking at the best and worst of this year. So yeah, go listen to that. But anyway, I digress. So yeah, World of Warcraft, it was able to become a major starting point for the entire Warcraft series and change it in a different direction, going in from like, like your traditional RPG games over from like platformers and a whole bunch of other things to this major global phenomenon. So yeah, Jordan, good choice for 2004. And another good choice for 2005 is Resident Evil 4.
Oh, I mean, like again, we could do a whole podcast on Resident Evil 4. I originally played it on the GameCube when it was exclusive, when at the time it was exclusively for that, and I just loved like obviously it's got that Resident Evil eeriness to it, and so the story goes that Leon Kennedy has been told that the president's daughter's been kidnapped, and she's been taken over to a Spanish country. I mean, it doesn't really say where, but I mean, you basically go over there and try and rescue her, and obviously you get further into it, and then you realize that this little Spanish village that you're in has actually been overtaken by like a cult that injects like these like parasitic organisms into one another, and so you end up getting injected yourself, and then it's up to you to rescue the president's daughter and then Ashley and be able to try and cure yourselves of the disease, and then be able to like fight Saddle off at the very end. So the whole thing's really intriguing, and also some of your favorite characters from Resident Evil 4 actually come back in from the series actually come back too. So
Yeah, from
like yeah.
Resident Evil 2, you have Leon S. Kennedy. Yeah, I mean he was able to become a lot more varied with his gameplay and with his skills compared to Resident Evil 2, in which he was just a cop from Raccoon City. So yeah, he was able to increase on his skills since then. And yeah, you get to talk to Hunnigan and you get to know about, what the situation is. You get to rescue Ashley, the president's daughter, and she could be a bit annoying at times, but not too irritating, especially if you just like
Leon, no!
Leon.
Oh my
Anyway,
God.
but
When she gets kidnapped as well, it's like, you're like, oh, son of a bitch. Like,
yeah, I know,
yeah,
right?
seriously.
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, you get to have like these really cool moments. There's a lot of quick time events. There's a lot of bosses that you get to fight off. There's a lot of obstacles that you have to overcome. They put a lot into this game, especially since you know about the production of it. Like the production of it was a nightmare. Like first of all, Resident Evil 4 was shaping up to be almost Devil May Cry because you have Shinji Mikami who just was developing the first few Resident Evil games, and then you have him just like getting accustomed to the fact that yeah, the tank controls are not very good. I want to be able to have it a little bit more open world. And then eventually it's he passed it on to Hideki Kamiya to do something different with it, and then eventually that was Devil May Cry, and then they decided to make that as its own standalone game. Then there was another version of it called Evil 4 1.5 something, involving with a guy with a hook hand, and then that version got scrapped. And then there was another version where they tweaked it up a little bit, and then that version got scrapped. And then finally, we got Resident Evil 4, the game that it is. And it's like they put so many things into that game all at once. Like, there's so many, like, moments that just appear once and then you never see it again. There's so many villains. There's so many creatures that are just scary. And they changed the gameplay style where it was focusing more on being like a horror game, where in this one, it's more like an action game with a little bit of horror in it. And it was able to become revolutionary for multiple reasons. That reason alone, and then there's also another reason, the gameplay style, where the first one you had like the tank controls and you were able to like run around, where in this one it's like an over the shoulder style where it pretty much influenced action games for the next 15 years, where a lot of games became like that style. You have like the Uncharted games, you have very you have the Mass Effect games, that's another example. Yeah, there's so many games that were able to implement that style of gameplay into it. The quick time events became more popularized because of Resident Evil 4, and then also the storyline was able to expand more into being more action based, which eventually led up to Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6 following in that same trend. So, yeah, Resident Evil 4 became pretty big for a reason.
Cool.
All right, so we go over to the next game and 2006. So this is the year in which gaming not just became just for the nerds. Everybody can enjoy gaming. The kids, the soccer moms, the grandmas and the grandpas, everybody loved it because the Wii came out. And Wii Sports, which was essentially like the first game that was came with your copy of a Nintendo Wii was brought in. And so, yeah, so Wii Sports, this is a really interesting pick, I must say.
Yeah. By the way, when the Nintendo Wii first came out, all of us here in the UK and in Australia giggled because Wii, as we call here in the UK, is like another word for urine. So
Oh.
like, yeah.
Oh my
So you won't
gosh.
imagine how we reacted when we heard about the Nintendo Wii. But yeah, but then we found out that actually when we got over our stupid giggles, we found out that we actually meant as in WE, so as in like all of us. So
Yes,
they definitely did that
exactly.
with Wii Sports, and let's be honest, everybody that I know play at least had one go with Wii Sports,
I
and so
knew
yeah.
so many people who played this game. I used when the Wii first came out, I used to work at a nursing home at that time, and for part of their exercise routine, they played Wii Sports. They played tennis, they played baseball, they played bowling, they played golf. Wii Sports was hugely popular for people who were in their 70s and 80s.
Yeah, like, was there ever that one person who ever took it too far? Like, I always had one person who always took it too far. So,
I remember hearing the story in the news about the guy who had the world record for the Wii bowling, and he was able to make a strike every single time. And I'm like, wow, this guy's more dedicated than I am, and he's much older. Like, good on you, man.
mhm.
But no, I remember that when the Wii came out, and everybody just thought it was like a stupid gimmick. But then when they actually played it, it's like, ooh, this is so cool. I get to have the controller in my hand, and when I move, it moves with me. I remember do you remember the Sega Activator?
I mean, to be honest with you, there was so many crappy things for the Sega Mega Drive that, were never, never got going. And I think the activator, remind me again, what
You
was,
remember the Activator was like that big circle that you get to stand in and you quote unquote were the controller.
oh, it's kind of like the Rolling Rocker.
Something
Uh,
like that. Yeah, instead of like you standing on it, it was like a circle that you had to stand inside of and you got to actually
Yeah, there
you
was
know,
that. Then there was like the pad for Dance Dance Revolution, and then
yep.
there was like oh good grief, they came up with so many crazy peripherals for
Yeah,
game
there was also the
consoles.
peripheral where you actually had to like put on like these motion straps so you get to play fighting games and it was stupid.
Yeah, there was if you remember, there was also like the what do we call it? What was it called? The power pad, and like
Yeah, the
yeah,
power
yeah,
pad. Yeah.
yeah, you got and nothing that comes between you and the game was the talking point, and like all there was just a bunch of sensors that you could waved at really to like control the game.
Yeah, and I
Um,
remember, I mean, the closest thing that I saw it possibly working was the iToy for the PlayStation 2. And
yeah.
yeah, it was fine. I mean, it was just basically like, you had your body and you got to see like a whole bunch of objects and you get to like move it out of the way. That was fine, but the Wii took it to a whole other level. Like you actually get to play games using your body as the controller, and it worked for the most part.
Yeah.
But
We all remember that one infamous peripheral for the Nintendo Entertainment System. I love the Power Glove. It's
it's
so
so
bad.
bad.
Yeah, it's bad, all right.
Yep. Thank you, Lucas, for promoting an awful peripheral that has lived on through the time of our generation. Thank you.
Yeah. So
Anyway, but yeah. So yeah, Wii Sports. Not my pick for 2006. I mean, I'll go over what my picks of would have been
is
for
it?
each
Well, I mean,
year.
you can't ignore it though. Like, it was a phenomenon at the time. Like
I
everybody
know,
I know played Wii
and
Sports.
I
Like,
think that's
and,
I think
and by the way, this is an important game because we all as gaming nerds did not all see it at the time. We were young, we were naive, we were stupid. Like, I was young and stupid. Like,
yeah,
I totally
it's
admit
true.
that.
I was
And
younger and
I never,
stupider.
Yeah, but here's the thing, like I never realized what Nintendo actually was doing at the time. I thought Nintendo was trying to like, win fans back with whatever they were doing and just completely missing the mark. No, they were trying to get everybody involved in video gaming, and if anything, it worked.
It did work.
Because they readied pretty much everybody to say, "Oh, hey, we got the Nintendo Switch here, and not only have we got the games that you've enjoyed with the Nintendo Wii and like all those types of other games, hey, all you guys out there, we've now got a system which you can also enjoy all the games that you like as well, and everyone else can enjoy games. And now, the Nintendo Switch right now is just, once again, it prints money."
Yeah,
That's
and that's the reason why there was that whole meme about like it prints money.
Well, I mean, they've been saying that for years, pretty much. Nintendo now, every time they release something, pretty much
Yeah, but I mean, it wasn't until the Wii in which they made the joke about it prints money
prints money. Yeah,
because both the Nintendo 64 and the GameCube were failures when you compare it to the PlayStation 2 and Microsoft's Xbox.
yeah. It's like, well, Sony, as you were saying, like, it's not a bug, it's a feature.
Yeah.
Fun times.
Yep.
But yeah,
Anyway, but yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I
I get
really,
there's other. I understand what you're saying. I get there's other games out there, but let's be honest. I mean, like, Wii Sports outstripped them all. Like, in regards to like, significance, in regards to how many, how many units is sold. Like all the impact that everybody has. I guarantee you, like you mentioned Wii Sports in front of a crowd of people. I guarantee you, a lot of people are gonna say, "Yeah, Wii Sports. I remember that."
yeah, yeah. Like if I were to bring a copy of Wii Sports over to my job and I would be surrounded by a whole bunch of people who would see me play tennis. They'll be like, Wii Sports, I remember I used to play that. Can I join you?
Hmm.
I would be
We would
surprised.
like to play.
We would like to play. Yes. Oh, the commercials. I remember those so vividly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, Wii Sports. It's a pretty revolutionary thing for its time. I remember at one point, Wii Sports oversold Super Mario Brothers as the best-selling game of all time. And then Tetris took it over. Anyway, but yeah, I remember this game was a juggernaut for a reason. Anyway, so yeah, 2007. This is a really interesting choice. Rock Band.
Yeah. Well, Rock Band also was a big thing too, and I remember people having the guitars, and I mean, even South Park even did an episode about it too. So if you remember.
Yeah, I'm more of a Guitar Hero fan than a Rock Band fan, to be quite honest. Especially
Well,
Guitar Hero
Rock Band had
3.
more variety. Like, you had the microphones, you had the guitars, you had like, all the instruments and stuff like that. So like, I could understand. And also, we got a lot of kids into music too. So
That is
like,
true,
you got
yeah. I
yeah.
remember that around the mid to late 2000s when Guitar Hero and Rock Band were coming out, it actually had gotten people interested in playing instruments. I will give it that.
Yeah, the one thing that people will complain about though is that the guitars obviously they're not like real guitars. So apparently people like who played the game and then went back to like the real instruments, they found out they kind of it mucked up their timing a little bit. So like yeah, so
Yeah.
it was. I mean, it's not a great thing if you're already like quite educated in an instrument. So
Yeah, I guess that's true. And yeah, I would say that when it comes to like the features of Rock Band, yes, I do admit that there is a lot more instruments that you get to be able to play around with. And you actually get to sing in this one too. Not only do you have the guitar, you also have a drum set and you also have a microphone so somebody can actually sing the music. So, yeah, I will admit that Rock Band is pretty cool and, obviously bringing in more people to play. And not to mention that, if you there was even an option that you get to play a keyboard in this one too. But yeah, it was the two guitars, the drums, and then the singer with the microphone. Yeah, I would say that it became just as successful as Guitar Hero. There were so many installments of Rock Band that a lot of people gravitated to. I remember the Green Day version of Rock Band, which was actually just mind blowing to me, especially as at the time I loved Green Day. But yeah, some of the songs that they were able to implement it was actually pretty cool. I mean, they had Metallica with Enter Sandman, they had Rolling Stones with Gimme Shelter, they had OK Goes, Here It Goes Again, they had Mountains, Mississippi Queen. So yeah, I mean, some of the songs were actually pretty awesome. I will give it that. But yeah, I mean, if you were to ask me, in terms of like me, I mean, I played Guitar Hero first, so I guess I'd lean a little bit more towards that, especially 3. That's like my favorite of this of the genre, in the series. I'm sorry, but yeah, I do really like Rock Band as well. But if I were to choose between the two of them, I probably would choose Guitar Hero. but that's just me. Anyway, now
Yeah.
this is a really interesting one, and I'm actually going to actually read an excerpt from the book because this actually brought up something really interesting. So his choice for his game for 2008 was Spore, and I'm thinking to myself, wait, Spore? That one game that the creator of Sims decided to make that didn't exactly meet up to a lot of expectations because it was promised with so many features that it didn't follow up with it. But I'm going to read off what he said. I'm not mad at Spore, I'm just disappointed. Video games can offer infinite possibilities, a power that easily turns into a blessing, from a blessing to a curse. Creators need to find the balance between giving players all that they can while having the restraint to not promise what they can ultimately deliver. It takes skill, discipline, self awareness, and a lot of luck. You can feel this tension even in the best of games, and no amount of talent and good intentions can save a game that bites off more than what it can chew. Combine that with a gaming audience totally unwilling to keep expectations in check, and you get the inevitable yet informative example of a game whose reality could never measure up to its impossible dream. Spore. So yeah, so Will Wright, the creator of the Sims games, wanted to do this massive, huge game called Spore, where you get to create your own creatures and you get to have like multiple civilizations and meet up with a whole bunch of other creatures, and you have this huge, expansive world. He was making so many promises of what he wanted it to be, and it met really, really short on expectations. It became one of those
Yeah, but
examples
if
about,
I should you two words, dick monsters.
ah,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's what sport ended up being. Just creations of people's genitalia
yeah.
and turn into, yeah, that's basically what it ended up being.
I'm just surprised that he included this on the list, even though that he wrote down about how it had a great concept, but its execution was really, really poor. I mean, I understand when reading into the book that there was a lot of expectations for Spore and how Will Wright really wanted this to be like his magnum opus after he was done with the Sims games. But yeah, I'm sorry. Just the fact that it did not just makes it even more of a letdown. I mean, 2008, I would say, was kind of like a hit and miss year for gaming, I do admit. I mean, especially since 2007, I would say is one of the greatest years of video games of all time. And I'll get to that later. But yeah, I mean, I'm just interested that this was his choice out of all the other games that came out that year. Yeah, I would just say that Spore is definitely one of those examples of video games that promised so much, but met very short of its expectations, like Mighty Number Nine or No Man's Sky or Fallout 76 or like various other games. So yeah, I mean, interesting choice that he was able to make. I will give him that. All right, so
Yeah.
2009, I'm going to talk more about this one because you haven't played it yet. Uncharted 2 Among Thieves. I love the Uncharted video games. I talked about this in the Naughty Dog podcast many, many years ago, and I still love the Uncharted games. For those who don't know, it's based off of a series of adventure games where the main protagonist, Nathan Drake, is a treasure hunter, where he goes around into different locations and tries to find rare treasures. And yeah, for this one, he goes into a massive adventure where he's like going around in the jungles and trying to find this rare artifact that is in this lost civilization. And so in the first game, they were looking for El Dorado. And the twist is that El Dorado is not what it seems to be. But again, I'm not going to spoil it for those who haven't played it yet. But I'll just say that El Dorado has a really unique twist in it. And so when the first Uncharted game first came out, it was essentially called Dude Raider because the Tomb Raider games were still fairly popular, and a lot of people just essentially called Nathan Drake the male Lara Croft. But then when they played it, it was completely different from a Tomb Raider game, and it was able to bring in some really unique things like a compelling story with interesting characters, and shootouts, quick time events, different locations to travel around in the world. And Uncharted 2 emphasizes that even more, where the first level is literally Nathan Drake injured when he's on a train in Tibet. And you have to climb out of it sideways. And it's really intense. And then you flash back into the events before that happened, where Nathan is searching around with his partner Sully for that lost civilization. And yeah, it goes into like these really great, unique twists and turns that I dare not spoil. But gameplay's even better. The set pieces are much better. Combat is much more improved and tightened up. The storyline is funnier. It's much more gripping. The villain, okay, I wasn't too keen on the villain, to be quite honest. The Uncharted games were not great when it comes to their villains. I will admit that. But yeah, he was serviceable. I'll just say that. The new character they were able to bring in, like Chloe Walsh, who was Nathan's ex-lover, really great addition. They were able to bring back Elena, who was from the first game that they kind of had like a little on and off crush on. Great addition into that. And yeah, I love Uncharted 2. 2 and 4 are my favorites in the franchise. It's kind of hard to decide which one I like because 2 was able to give great set pieces. I love the little moments where, there's a train set, there's the scene in which when Nathan is trying to run away from the cart, there's him climbing on the mountainside, there's him wandering around in the cities of I think it was like Tibet. And yeah, there's just so many little set moments that are fantastic. And I like 4 because they were able to tighten up a lot of the things that they learned from the first 3 games. The story was expanded and it had a great, satisfying ending. So again, tied between 2 and 4 is my favorite, but yeah, 2 is a great game. So yeah, I would say check out the games if you haven't. They're really great adventure games if you're into those. All right, so 2010. Now we go over to what was essentially the beginning point of the indie genre, where you have people who were dedicated fans of retro games from their youth and didn't really see a lot of it in modern games. So they decided, let's just create the games by ourselves and release it to the public. And the first one was Super Meat Boy.
Yeah, Super Meat Boy, it definitely grabs everyone's attention, and it's just about that. I think we were also lacking, like that classic 2D, scroller like that we wanted. I mean, a lot of indie games tried to do that, and they didn't really get the idea of like what came back before, like a couple of decades ago. But Super Meat Boy understood that, and yeah, that's as much as I remember from it. So.
Yeah, so Super Meat Boy is the game where you have a kid who's made out of meat and he's trying to rescue his girlfriend, Bandage Girl, from Dr. Fetus. Yes. And you have these little callbacks to Super Mario Brothers 3, in which you get to go to different levels and you get to do a lot of trial and error moments with the level design. It is so painfully difficult. You have to be perfect with your accuracy when moving around with these levels because there's chainsaws, there's salt, there's there's needles, there's a whole bunch of things that can easily kill you. But the great thing about Super Meat Boy was that the precision of the controls are tight and precise. Like if you screw up, it's your fault. It's not the game's fault. It's not like, I want to be the guy in which like it is brutally difficult, like stupidly difficult. With Super Meat Boy, the gameplay is a lot more precise, and you get to be able to play around with the movements and the wall jumps and the jumps and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a really great game. And I know that technically Cave Story from 2004 was kind of like one of the first ones that implement like indie gameplay into the mainstream, where essentially one guy created the entire game by himself. But Super Meat Boy was the one that kind of like brought it into the mainstream, where you have two guys who made the game by themselves and dedicated hours upon hours for months at a time in their computers so that they can be able to release it exclusively on the Xbox. And it was to the point in which it became so popular that it was part of the indie video game movie that came out around roughly the same time. So it was like one of the major things that was highlighted. So yeah, I think partially because of games like Cave Story and Super Meat Boy, that indie games became hugely popular, if not even more popular than AAA games.
Mhm.
All right, so yeah, let's round things up. And unfortunately, with the more recent games, I don't really have too much to say about it, so I'm just gonna breeze through them. And if you want to go more into it, then you're more than welcome to, Aaron. So
Okay.
2011, I mean, it's pretty much like the nomination for every Kids' Choice Award at this point in time, and
Yeah.
even still to this day, that has gotten so many releases and updates and DLC and expansions. Minecraft.
Yeah, I mean, like it's Minecraft. I mean, like there's not much else to say about it, really. I mean, if you've not heard of Minecraft already, I mean, I wonder what big, massive rock you've been living under this entire time.
I tried playing Minecraft when it first came out on the beta form, and I got completely lost and confused. It's like I'm sorry. It's like, what do I do? I'm in this blocky world, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And
It's one
then
of those games that you really have to kind of like, probably like grab an idea of like, what you need to set out to do in order to kind of like get the idea of the game. So, I mean, I understand it pretty much. Like,
y-
you go out and get some blocks, and then like you build yourself like a little house, and then you have to get in there before like I think like there's like a creeper that comes in and kind
yeah,
of
the
blows you up if you
creepers,
like it.
yeah, yeah. And then there's
Yeah,
also
yeah,
the
exactly.
Endermans, yeah.
Yeah,
But
so
again, very similar to SimCity, I suck at these games. I do not do very well with like these kind of games that you get to make your own stuff and you get to customize things. I'm just terrible at that. So yeah, I never got into Minecraft for that kind of reason. So yeah, I'm sorry everybody. I can't really delve more into it. Now Telltale's The Walking Dead was his choice for 2012. And again, very interesting choice. Now, this was a major revolutionary thing back in the time, back in the day, because it was about multiple choice. Very, kind of like similar to what they did with Mass Effect, in which like it was the gamer's choice. It's like, okay, you're in a situation in which you're in this world filled with zombies, and you have all these people that you meet up with, and eventually you're going to have to make a decision on what's going to be the outcome of them. Are they going to live or are they going to die? And very similar to a Mass Effect game, if you play on throughout the later games, those decisions heavily affect what the later games would become. And so, yeah, I think that Telltale was able to make gangbusters with their making of The Walking Dead, because before this, Telltale were known for releasing the Strong Bad video game, which is the cool game for attractive people, and they also did remakes of the Secret of Monkey Island games, and they even did a new version of it, which was basically like kind of like a best of, where basically like you took some of the best elements of Monkey Island and brought it into this new game. But yeah, The Walking Dead was the one that really, really got people's interest in Telltale games. And yeah, I did an entire podcast with my buddy Jim about Telltale when they shut down, unfortunately. So yeah, if you want to know more about that, go check it out.
cool.
Now, I've never played Depression Quest from 2013, so I don't have anything to say about
I've
this
never
one.
played it about it either. Yeah, so moving on to the next one.
All right, so 2014, another game that I haven't played because it doesn't really gravitate to me, Destiny. So this was like after Bungie was done making the Halo games, and they moved over to Activision Blizzard and they made this game. And it was a bit rough at first from what I've heard from people talking about it, but then the Taken King expansion was able to make it a lot better. And yeah, again, I have not played this game. I'm not into battle royale games, so I'm sorry. I'm not really interested in these kind of games.
Yeah, I mean, like for me, I mean, like a Destiny. I mean, obviously, I never played. I never had a PlayStation at that time, so I don't really have any like experience with it myself. But from what I understand, I mean, like there's a lot of people who like are really into Destiny and they really do love the game. So shout out to
Yeah,
all of you if you really do enjoy it.
absolutely. Now, this one, we talked about this in Aaron and Patricia many years ago about how much of a surprise hit it was, especially when it reached over to Game of the Year, and that was The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt.
Yeah, so I've heard of The Witcher as well. Not played it personally, but I do know people who enjoyed it, and so
Yeah.
yeah, that's all I can
Same
really say about
thing. Yeah, same
that.
thing. Reasons on JRPGs and RPGs and anything with RPGs in it. Again, not into them. Try to get into them, couldn't get invested in it. But again, I've heard a lot of people say that they really love The Witcher 3. They said that the early Witcher games were okay, but nothing to write home about. But this is the one that really gotten people just invested in it. It's based off of a book series that was released in Poland, I think it was, and then it was made into a video game series. And it got a bit of a cult fan base, but then 3 came out and then everybody knew about the Witcher games. And then to the point in which they did that Witcher TV series on Netflix, from what I remember. But yeah, again, not played it, so I can't really go into it. Now, this is a game that I have played, and I have mixed opinions on it, but I remember the buzz that it received. 2016 was the year of Pokemon Go.
Oh, Pokemon Go was just it was a revelation, wasn't it? Like oh hey, you can finally send your kids outside, to go look for Pokemon, actually do other stuff besides look for Pokemon.
I
Like,
know, right?
like
I know that Hideo Kojima tried to do this with the Boktai games, in which, hey, you have a Game Boy Advance game where you have to go outside in order for you to get your sun abilities.
yeah. So one thing I would say is that I mean obviously you go out and you obviously go find Pokemon and I mean it was a bit degrading when you go out to outside your own house and you'd find or you find these like rat Pokemon and insect Pokemon around the place sorry, pigeon Pokemon I guess you could say. It's dude, what are you trying to say about where I live? It's but yeah, that was interesting the way they put the gyms as well, because they put the gyms in pretty interesting places. And I think at one
Yeah.
point they actually put a gym in the middle of a lake, so you had to go you get a canoe to go and or a boat to go out towards that gym and actually be able to find whatever's in there.
Yeah,
Great, yeah.
and there was also a lot of gyms and a lot of like major battles that you had to go into churches, and then some churches actually had to ban people from playing Pokemon Go on their phones inside. And there were even like some houses that around the area there were rare Pokemon to find, and they were really upset with it. Yeah,
Mm.
Pokemon Go, this came around when Pokemon was celebrating its 20th anniversary. And people have been hearing about like what are they going to do to celebrate. I remember this vividly because I remember that 2016 was also the year of Pokemon Origins, which I absolutely loved. And I know that some people were kind of mixed with it, but I love it. The fact that they were able to bring in the story of Red and Blue into animation form, which I wanted to so badly when I was a teenager. Um, also, the fact that they were able to release X and Y, which I know that some people were kind of mixed with, but again, I absolutely loved it. So around 2013, 2014 was when I got back into Pokemon again. And then 2016, when they were celebrating their 20th anniversary, and I heard the news about Pokemon Go, I was really excited. It's like I get to play Pokemon on my phone and I get to walk around and capture Pokemon. But unfortunately, there were some major issues with it. It was glitchy. It didn't have a lot of features that a lot of people were promised it was going to have. There was no online connectability with battles with your friends. It just became a letdown. And then over time, when they did started to build up on it and they started to put in some of the things that people promised, the the craze died down a lot. So, yeah,
Hmm.
2016 was definitely the year that a lot of people said that was when the world actually just started to get along with each other because we all just played Pokemon Go. I mean, especially since 2016 was the year that Trump got elected. So I guess we needed something happy to play along with our
I
phone.
guess so, yeah. But anyway, so hey, we had Pokemon Go at that time,
Yeah,
so
that's
yeah,
true.
very good.
All right. So again, 2017, I remember that I played this game for 20 minutes. I got killed off and I never played it again. Fortnite.
Fortnite, yeah, I never, here's the thing, I like Epic Games, I played Unreal Tournament, I played Gears of War, I played a lot of their stuff, but I got to be honest with you, Fortnite, I sort of kind of didn't really want to go towards it.
I
It didn't feel like my
tried.
type. It didn't feel like my type of game, really. I
Yeah,
never
it didn't feel
played
like
it.
my type of game either. Like I said, it was a battle royale game. It was like, okay, I get the appeal about like a whole bunch of people coming together and just shooting off and killing everybody. Okay, fine. But yeah, I remember I played the beta version of it. And like I said, I wandered around for 20 minutes, didn't know what to do. I picked up an axe and I thought to myself, okay, can I kill somebody with it? Didn't find anybody. They killed me right behind my back. And I'm like, you know what? Screw this. I want to play Rayman Origins. So yeah, I'm sorry. I never got back to it afterwards. I mean, I can't now because the original Fortnite is gone and now there's Fortnite 2. And I am not going to give my time and money to Activision Blizzard. So no way. Okay, 2018. Okay, we can get into this because we own the game. Super Smash Brothers Ultimate.
Yeah. So I suppose Smash Brothers, I think, since the 64 days, it's just been a fun fighting game. And finally, they came with Ultimate, and this included this wasn't just including a couple of characters. This included everybody, and it also tweaked up the fighting system, and everyone was really into it. And I mean, me honestly, I mean, my last series Smash Brothers game I got seriously into was obviously Brawl, and also Wii U. And so I kind of was kind of dipping off a little bit at that time. But I did pick up Ultimate, and I've played a little bit of the campaign, but I've not really done much else besides that. Really, I've got to be honest with you. So.
Hmm. Yeah. And as for Ultimate, yes, I do love the fact that the slogan was everyone is here. And it was able to allow the audience to choose what characters they wanted to see in Smash Brothers Ultimate. And I remember I made a lot of requests. I made the request of having Simon Belmont in a Super Smash Brothers game because I was so upset that they had left off Castlevania. It's like, come on, he would be perfect for Smash. And I was so happy when I saw not only Simon brought in there, but Trevor as well, and then Richter. So that made me super happy. And yeah, I remember also the other announcements that gotten people really excited. I remember Sora from Kingdom Hearts was able to become a big splash. I remember when Banjo-Kazooie was brought in and it made a huge splash. Like, it was able to exceed everybody's expectations of a Smash Brothers game. And I'm really happy that, each installment of Super Smash Brothers was able to become better and better than the next one. Like, yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird, like, looking back on the original N64 Smash when you know that Smash Ultimate was able to bring everything and more. So, yeah, it's definitely the best out of the Smash Brothers series. And I was a huge fan of both Melee and Brawl. So, that just goes to show you about how much Ultimate was able to change everything. So, yeah, one of the ultimate party fighting games is rampant for a reason on why Ultimate is still fantastic. Now,
Hmm.
2019, again, great year for games, but again, I have not played this one. Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. This was a game that I've heard of so much, but I never had the opportunity to play it.
Yeah, I mean, I've never played it either, so I can't really comment.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
And here's the thing. I know that From Software has done some amazing games. They've done the Soul series, they did Bloodborne, they did Elden Ring. I know that of what kind of games that they're able to do. And Sekiro Shadows Die Twice was also a game that a lot of people were really into as well. So again, I'm not saying that From Software games are terrible. No, I'm not saying that. I just haven't had the chance to play them yet. I need to really get myself invested in it if I'm gonna die 100 million times, because
Hmm.
yeah, I don't have the time to do that kind of stuff. So yeah, shout out to Sekiro Shadows Die Twice for Jordan's game of the year for 2019. Okay,
Yeah.
2020. Oh boy, 2020, the pandemic where everybody had to stay home and they had to do a whole bunch of things besides going outside, otherwise they get sick. And there were a lot of great choices for 2020, and he chose Animal Crossing New Horizons.
Yeah, I mean, Animal Crossing New Horizons, I think if you ask hardcore Animal Crossing fans, isn't really as great as the GameCube version. However, that's not to say it's not a good game within itself. You know, everyone really enjoys New Horizons for Horizon. And also, I remember when they came up with this thing where, apparently now, the Animal Crossing character is friends with the with the Doomslayer because they
They came out
share
at
the
the
same.
same time.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah, so Doom Eternal and Animal Crossing New Horizons came out literally at the same day. And so there was this whole internet movement about making the Doom Slayer and what's her name? The mayor of the Animal Crossing games. But yeah, they decided to make them like besties. And I just thought to myself, that is so adorable that they were able to do that. I mean, you have these two completely opposite games where you have like this first person shooter game involving with you in hell, shooting a whole bunch of demons, and then you have like this cute, cuddly, happy game. And you get to be able to interact with all these animal friends, and you get to be able to collect things and make friends. Isabella, that's what her name is. Okay.
Isabel, yeah,
Isabel,
sorry,
Isabel,
I
yeah, that's what
forget.
her name. Okay, you have Isabel the mayor, who's adorable, and you have KK Slider, who plays the music, and he's adorable, and you have all these characters who are adorable, and it's like you would never think that they would ever interact with each other, let alone be drawn in the same picture. But no, they love it. In fact, the guys behind Doom Eternal said, "We love this." It's kind of like you know how Barbie and Oppenheimer came out in the same day? It's like that version but with video games. So yeah, I've heard a lot of people really love New Horizons because because in 2020 we were not able to go outside due to the pandemic. They said that Animal Crossing New Horizons was kind of like living off life in computers and in video games that they couldn't do in real life, and it was a great escape from what was going on in the hell of a world that we had lived through in 2020. So I do understand about important it was during that time period. So yeah. All right,
Yeah.
now 2021 is a very interesting one because Jordan doesn't choose a game of the year for himself. He actually did a co-op bonus round where he actually gotten some other people from various outlets, whether it be from Kimari Rennes, who was a senior intern at the New York Video Game Critics Circle at New York University, or Mega Ran, who was a rapper who you may know for his Mega Man raps. Awesome guy, by the way. He does really cool stuff. And then there's Victoria Song and Gabe Carey, who are the reviewers of The Verge. They were able to give off their thoughts of what games they loved in 2021. So yeah, I'm actually intrigued with this. But yeah, they're okay. So Kimari's choice was Psychonauts 2. Mega Rand's choice was Halo Infinite, and Victoria and Gabe's choice was It Takes Two. So yeah, let's start off with Psychonauts 2. So yeah, I love the original Psychonauts. It was a game that I enjoyed immensely. So yeah, we essentially have a game where you get to play as a little guy named Rasputin or Raz, and you get to go inside people's minds and memories, and you get to be able to explore them. And you have to play with all these really unique abilities because you're a psychonaut, and you get to be able to read through people's memories and how tragic and sad they are. You get to meet up with a bunch of quirky characters. And yeah, it was essentially like a fantastic game that never really got its due because it was a box office failure. Well, not a, it was a, it was a bomb when it came out in the gaming circuit. But then it gained a massive cult following. And then eventually Tim Schafer released a Kickstarter, and a lot of people poured money into seeing a Psychonauts 2, and it was released and everybody loved it. So, yeah, I think that Psychonauts 2 is actually a really great choice. Halo Infinite and It Takes Two, I have not played, sadly.
Yeah.
All right, now finally, last but certainly not least, 2022, and again, I have not played this, but I've heard people talking about it. The Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe.
I've heard of the Stanley Parable. I've seen Let's Plays of people doing this, and the Stanley Parable is a very interesting game. It's not like you have to beat a bad guy or you have to do something like that. If anything, you're kind of like going through like this sort of like psychological experience. If anything, like here's the Stanley Parable, and anyone who's like seen the demo, I think will definitely say that it's a very unique thing that you kind of go through. So again, I've not had a chance. It's in the to-do list. The Stanley Parable. I get it's been from it's been years since I've actually first laid eyes on it, and I've been meaning to kind of play it. But the Stanley Parable, to be fair, is it's not like one of the like you shoot something, you play something, or something like that. It's an experience. Effectively, that you go through. So
Yeah,
but I hope to have that experience myself one day when I finally get some free time to myself.
absolutely. All right, so that is all the games that was listed in Jordan Miner's book, Video Game of the Year. So, yeah, I really enjoyed reading through this book. And there's a lot more to the book. There's a lot of runner-ups of video games that came out in certain years. There's a lot of discussions about the importance of some of the video games that he chose. We decided not to go too in depth with it because we want you to read the book for yourself.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, in regards to like overall, I mean, like there are some games I would have definitely thought, definitely deserve to be Game of the Year, at least in my opinion. I think Star Fox, I think on Super Nintendo, I think definitely needs to be one of them because that was one of the very first games that actually used the Super FX chip that actually, enhanced the console itself. So I thought, that deserved at least a little bit of a mention. Also, I get they put in Counter-Strike in there, but I think Half-Life itself, I think was also a revolutionary game in it as well. Also, Doom, Quake, for some of the the best shooters. I think that came out at the time. I feel like they deserved at least a little bit of a mention, at least for Game of the Year. At least in my opinion, Unreal Tournament definitely does deserve a mention of that. And I get Fortnite's in there and everything like that, which is like what somewhat Unreal Tournament was kind of like a little bit about. But I mean, in my opinion, I think and I get not every game can be Game of the Year. I totally get that as well. And but I feel like there's also other games out there that also were I think haven't been recognized in the book, which I think definitely deserve a bit of a nod, at least in my
yeah,
opinion.
absolutely. Like
So,
Super Metroid definitely deserves a bit of a chance for Game of the Year back in 1994, especially
mm,
since it was able to revolutionize the exploration genre. And even Castlevania Symphony of the Night was able to be one of the major pieces for the Metroidvania genre. The original Castlevania would have been a great mention for the year 1987. And yeah, there's some other games that I would have loved to have been implemented in there too. Sure, like I would have loved to have seen maybe a slight mention of Crash Bandicoot again, or Spyro the Dragon. Maybe even Jack and Daxter or Ratchet and Clank would have been a great introduction, or maybe even there's some other games that I can think of like that could have been a massive contender. Metroid Dread would have been a really great introduction. Maybe even Metroid Prime would have been a good one as well. Yeah, but I'm just surprised of some of the choices, but again, that's his opinion, and it depends on which game was able to influence on him, which is perfectly fine. But yeah, I'm just now, yeah, like I have my choices of what I would have chosen for Game of the Year, and so was Aaron. So yeah, for every year that we had listed from 1977 to 2022, yeah, I'm actually curious for all of you to leave your thoughts in the comments below about what your thoughts of for your game of what your games are for each respective year. Now, as for 2023, he hasn't mentioned it because this book did come out at the beginning of 2023. So, yeah, he wasn't able to write down his thoughts of it because we're just now literally at the last day of 2023. And yeah, sadly, I didn't play a lot of games this year, but I do love Super Mario Brothers Wonder. What about you, Aaron?
In regards to this year, I think Tears of the Kingdom's always been my game of the year, at least in my opinion.
All
So,
right.
like, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, in the comments below for all of you guys, which would you say is your respected game for each respective year? You don't have to go through like all the way from the 70s. Just like maybe pick a year that means a lot to you, whether it be like a year that you remember video games fondly, or remember a year that you first played video games, or even a year that you were born in. Yeah, let us know through each and every single year what your thoughts of for each video game that you would have chosen as game of the year. And that is it for casual chats for 2023. See you in 2024. Take care, everyone.
Bye bye.